Good morning. The Subcommittee on State, Foreign Operations and Related Programs will come to order. Bang it again. To our distinguished witnesses, welcome. Thank you for coming to our subcommittee to present your views on the agencies. Is this on?
Yes, ma'am.
And programs funded by the State Department, Foreign Operations and Related Programs, appropriations. Our public witnesses represent a wide array of perspectives and expertise that help Congress better assess the impact and effectiveness of foreign assistance. As we assess the President's budget request for fiscal year 2020, your voices are critical to the appropriations process. Let me be very clear. Our nation's security cannot afford a budget that does not adequately fund our diplomatic and development programs or life-saving humanitarian assistance. The draconian cuts this administration continues to advocate are irresponsible, particularly at a time of unprecedented human suffering, and wholesale, haphazarded cuts are not an option. For as long as I have been a part of this subcommittee, we have had bipartisan agreement that foreign assistance is critical to our national security and to maintaining America's leadership role in the world. As chairwoman, I have every expectation that we will produce a bill that maximizes each taxpayer dollar while responding to today's many needs. We're eager to hear your testimonies and look forward to working with your organizations throughout the appropriations process. Before we begin with our first witness, let me turn to Ranking Member Rogers for his opening remarks. Mr. Rogers.
Good morning, Madam Chair and audience. I want to thank the Madam Chair for taking on such an ambitious endeavor today. 11 panels, 34 organizations here to testify on their priorities for 2020. In the interest of time, Madam Chair, I'm going to curtail my remarks except to say that I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses, thank them for their time today. I also want to offer my condolences to Mr. O'Keefe from Catholic Relief Services. I understand you lost 4 colleagues in the plane crash over the weekend. Our thoughts and prayers are with their families and your entire organization, as well as all the other victims of the crash. I yield back.
Thank you and welcome. Our first panel is Mr. Howard Kaur, Chief Executive Officer of AIPAC, Ambassador Michael Clausen, Save the Children, Vice President of Save the Children, and Mr. Yo, President of the Better World Campaign. I thank you for joining us today. Please summarize your statement as your full testimony will be placed into the record. You each will have 4 minutes, starting with Mr. Kaur, then Ambassador Clausen, and finally Mr. Yo. We will withhold any questions until after Mr. Yo has finished. The clock will flash yellow when you have 1 minute remaining. Mr. Kaur, please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. First, let me express my thanks to you, Chairman Lowy and Ranking Member Rogers, and all members of this subcommittee for your continued steadfast support. poses both an immediate and longer-term threat to Israeli citizens. Rather than help Gazans, the designated terror group has spent tens of millions of dollars building the elaborate terror infrastructure, consolidating its political power, and choosing to cynically use Palestinian civilians as human shields in their ongoing war with Israel. As a result of these threats, Israel's had to significantly increase its defense budget, and America has generously agreed to increase U.S. assistance to Israel in the 2016 U.S.-Israel Memorandum of Understanding. AIPAC strongly urges this subcommittee to approve $3.3 billion to Israel in security assistance as called for in the second year of that MOU. By providing security assistance to Israel, the United States safeguards the Jewish state's qualitative military edge over its adversaries and enhances the safety and security of both nations. As a result, it is one of the most cost-effective and efficient programs in the U.S. foreign assistance budget. In addition to the threats at our borders, Israel continues to be singled out at home and again, singled out time and time again at the United Nations and targeted in the international arena, most recently in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, in an effort to delegitimize the Jewish state and work against any prospects for peace between Israel and her neighbors. Since the founding of the state, Israel has worked tirelessly to bring peace with all her neighbors. Israel signed peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan in 1979 and 1995, in return for which Israel dismantled its settlements and gave up every inch of the Sinai and its oil fields. In 2005, Israel withdrew every single Israeli soldier and every Israeli citizen from the Gaza Strip, and yet, tragically, the conflict with the Palestinians continues. We must all work and strive for a future where there are two states for two peoples, one Jewish with secure and defensible borders, and a demilitarized Palestinian state with its own flag and its own future. There is no substitute for direct negotiations. There are no shortcuts to peace. The investment in the United States in the pursuit of peace over many decades remains just as important today for the future of so many. Beyond the security assistance to Israel, AIPAC urges support for a robust and bipartisan foreign aid program that ensures America's strong leadership position in the world. The bipartisan support of the subcommittee will be even more critical to America as America and Israel continue to work together to meet the challenges that lie ahead and to advance toward the goal of a more peaceful, more stable, and more secure Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Ranking Member Rogers, thank you for the opportunity to underscore the vital importance of American leadership in alleviating suffering and crises around the world and helping families lift themselves out of poverty. Save the Children is a nonprofit, child-focused organization, often in partnership with U.S. government and many others. We work in 120 countries around the world and right here in America in 14 states. And last year, we helped 157 million children. We meet the day after the administration transmitted its FY20 budget request. What can one say? Clearly, the third time was not the charm. And it's a week when the Syria crisis enters its 9th year. But fortunately, the subcommittee and the Congress recognize the challenges that vulnerable children in Syria and elsewhere face and support robust American leadership. When I travel abroad, I see the important difference that leadership makes. In South Sudan last year, I met with community leaders in Kapaweta, a village in the eastern part of the country. Standing in the baking sun outside grass-thatched huts, these leaders told me about a program of training and equipping community health workers that was funded by the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. And this program was saving their children from malaria and pneumonia. These programs are indispensable in reaching such children with critical services. And doing so both improves the lives of those children, but also advances our national interests and projects America as a dynamic force for progress around the world. Now is not the time to shortchange those children or cripple our foreign policy and assistance tools. Here are 4 reasons why Congress should fund the international affairs budget at $60 billion. First, Save the Children's recent analysis, which showed that the changing nature of conflict means more children are in harm's way for longer periods. In fact, nearly 1 in 5 children live in a conflict zone. And imagine what life is like for those 420 million children. They face bullets and bombs, not to mention collapsing health systems, sanitation systems, and education systems. And I'm sure the committee would agree that the U.S. has a key role to play in mitigating these threats, especially in areas important to our national interests. U.S. humanitarian programs literally are the difference between life and death for many. They provide access to health, to food, water, shelter. We all need to do more, not less. Children must have access as well to education, psychosocial support, and protection. These are vital needs that often go overlooked in humanitarian crises. Second, we're not going to achieve our shared goals without investing in gender equality. The U.S. must continue its investments that promote global gender equality, women's and girls' empowerment, and I think the evidence is crystal clear. Countries are more likely to be prosperous and stable when girls are educated, healthy, and free from gender-based violence. Girls with a secondary education and access to gender-responsive health care are more likely to marry later, earn more income during their lives, and face fewer complications from childbirth. Third, despite incredible progress helping children survive and thrive, the job is not done. Such investments by donors and increasingly by countries themselves cement the foundation for stable and healthy societies. And we can thank American leadership that 18,000 more children are alive today than any day in 1990. USAID's investments in education have provided nearly 70 million children with early grade reading instruction. That's a real progress multiplier. And despite this progress, though, stubborn challenges remain, and we have to stay the course. Sadly, 1 million children, infants, die on the day they're born of preventable causes. So we have to maintain those programs and help other countries step up and support them. The fourth reason is USAID's transformation, and we very much welcome Administrator Green's concept of the journey to self-reliance as a pathway to sustainable development. And we urge Congress to support USAID's operating expenses. So in closing, let me thank you for your continued leadership in investing in U.S. humanitarian development programs. Save the Children appreciates the bipartisan support for programs that fight poverty and save lives. And after all, these programs help prepare the children of today to become tomorrow's generation of amazing leaders who are going to make the world a safer, more just, and prosperous place, all to America's benefit. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee for giving me the opportunity to explain why robust funding for the United Nations and other global health and development accounts is in our country's best interests. Let me first thank this subcommittee for its past support for the United Nations and highlight an issue of deep concern to Congress, addressing one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time, Yemen. The UN is the only organization that can both relieve the immense humanitarian suffering in Yemen and find a path to end this conflict. The UN estimates that 22 out of Yemen's 29 million people need humanitarian assistance. UN agencies are working as one to address these needs, providing food, shelter, and maternal and reproductive health services to millions. Meanwhile, the UN has brought the parties together to negotiate a political solution, recently reaching a ceasefire that, if implemented, could provide a roadmap out of this crisis. As evidenced by the 21 UN staff who lost their lives over the weekend in the Ethiopian plane crash, UN workers are often taking great risks to do their jobs, including in Yemen. UN peacekeepers share that spirit. Peacekeepers are battling al-Qaeda terrorists in Mali, pushing back against militias in eastern Congo that are attacking Ebola treatment facilities, and protecting nearly 250,000 civilians in South Sudan. UN peacekeepers stand between us and extremist elements all over the world. That saves American lives and taxpayer dollars. In a recent study, the GAO found that it was 8 times cheaper to deploy a UN peacekeeping mission than to deploy US troops. It's therefore not surprising that, according to a Gallup poll released last week, 66% of Americans believe that the UN plays a necessary role in the world today. As such, we respectfully request full funding for the UN and UN peacekeeping. For the past several years, however, the U.S. has not fully paid its UN peacekeeping dues. As this committee has recognized, the U.S. now owes more than $750 million in arrears, and that's causing major financial challenges at the UN. Countries like Ethiopia and Bangladesh, contributing over 14,000 peacekeepers, are not being paid fully or on time. That's not fair, particularly since nearly 250 peacekeepers were killed over the past 2 years in the line of duty, and frankly, we'd be furious if we weren't being paid. In December, the Trump administration supported a new UN peacekeeping assessment rate of 27.89% for the next 3 years, I urge the committee to lift the 25% peacekeeping cap, similar to what was done in both Republican and Democratic leadership, and pay our dues at the negotiated level to avoid further arrears. We are a great nation, and great nations pay their bills. We also believe that Congress should fully fund UN work critical to Americans and American values. Here are a few examples. The UN Office of Drugs and Crime tracks shipments of opioids and synthetics like fentanyl across the globe. Opioids were responsible for the majority of the 70,000 drug fatalities in the U.S. in 2017. Childhood immunization overseas, including investments in WHO and UNICEF, in turn protect Americans from communicable diseases that don't respect borders. Malaria-related deaths have dropped 62% worldwide, in part due to the distribution of bed nets, but much work remains, and U.S. leadership against malaria must continue. And fulfilling the need for voluntary family planning and providing quality maternal health care could reduce maternal deaths by an estimated 67%. That's why we request that you support our bilateral reproductive health programs, UN Women, and UNFPA. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your continued leadership in support of a strong and robust global affairs budget. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the entire panel. Your presentations were formative, and if we had a week, I know that all of us would have many questions. We'll take a few questions, and I know we'll continue this dialogue. Mr. Kaur, one of my concerns, as you well know, is keeping support bipartisan. The Israel-United States relationship must remain bipartisan, in my judgment. What, in your view, would be the consequence of making Israel a political football?
Well, Madam Chairman, the passion that you bring to this issue of U.S.-Israel relationship and the support for the concept of bipartisanship is one that we share. We believe deeply that for the United States to continue to maintain its critical role in the region and support for Israel requires both Democrats and Republicans to continue to work together. We think this is still vital to the United States, and we think there's an important reason for this issue to be an opportunity to bring Democrats and Republicans together. So we will do everything we can to continue to ensure that that bipartisanship remains as a central issue of the United States. As we like to say, the American support for Israel is not a Democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's an American issue, and we deeply believe that.
I thank you, and I just want to say, as you know, I've been serving on this committee and this Congress a long time, and I think it's absolutely essential that we keep this a bipartisan issue. Mr. Rogers.
Thank all of you for your testimony here today, and thank you especially, Mr. Kaur, for your testimony and for your hard work in ensuring that the strong and steadfast relationship between the U.S. and Israel is maintained. We're pleased to finally get the $200 million increase in the 019 bill across the finish line in support for Israel, and I know it's urgently needed. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could ask Mr. Clausen briefly, or make a comment.
To my ranking member.
Thank you for the good work your outfit does around the world, especially here at home. I believe Save the Children had their first American programs in Harlan County, Kentucky, in my district.
Right.
1932. And you and I are both still here.
Actually, we're coming up on our 100th anniversary because we were founded in the UK in 1919. So this is our 100th anniversary year.
Oh, great.
1932 in the U.S.
Well, in Harlan County, you provided clothing and supplies, hot lunches to students. Your organization has a proud history of serving children in need. So keep up the good work, and we thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr.
Yield
Rogers.
back.
Thank you. Ms. Frankel.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Just wanted to, sorry for I'm still clogged up from my flight yesterday. What do you see as the best programs on the issue of empowering women?
Well, I would just note that the UN Population Fund works in countries around the world to make sure that women have access to voluntary family planning, but also the full range of maternal health care needs being taken care of. Most of the babies being born among Syrian refugees are being born in clinics supported by UNFPA. So I think it's worth noting that as we think about the empowerment of women economically in terms of their own lives, that it's vital that they have access to the full range of reproductive health services that can allow that empowerment to occur.
And didn't our administration cut off funding to UN population?
That's correct. The U.S. no longer funds UNFPA.
Is that the best okay. How much was that? Do you know how much was cut off?
Yeah, it's more than 40 million.
Well, Madam Chair, obviously, we're going to have to take a look at that. Do you know, supposedly they administration diverted funds elsewhere to do the same kinds of things. Is that happening, do you know?
My understanding is some of the funds flow to USAID. You'd have to ask USAID for a greater accounting as to what programs are being supported with that redirected money.
Thank you. Mr. Clausen, did you want to add your?
I would say that besides what Peter mentioned, I think one of the important things is always to mainstream these kind of considerations into whatever program you're doing. And so I'm responsible for the humanitarian side of things. And we really focus in on making sure that these programs are serving the needs of girls and women. And mainstreaming these gender considerations is critical. And particularly education is vital.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We could go on in that issue, but I think I will move to Mr. Fortenberry. Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I could follow up on your excellent comments to Mr. Kaur regarding the essential nature of the relationship that we have with Israel, and that it continues to always need to be bipartisan as we approach things. Ms. Lowy and I, with her leadership, have worked on the Partnership for Peace Fund together. And I understand there's been some dialogue with you in this regard. From my perspective, I think as we project out and try to reimagine how things ought to be, laying the foundation for the roadmaps for peace are absolutely critical. And this bill, in my mind, does that by creating the possibility of joint economic projects, joint environmental projects, exchanges, that again create the preconditions for what we all want to hope and imagine. So I understand you're aware of this bill, and again, back to the bipartisan approach, I think you have one right here in front of you.
Yes, well, thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your longstanding commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship. Look, I think the idea here of trying to find ways to continue to empower Palestinians in the economic sphere to create a better economic opportunity are things we want to take a look at. For us, the critical element here is it needs to be done in a way that also benefits and encourages Israelis and Palestinians to work together, and to ensure also that the resources aren't being diverted to the Palestinian Authority, that this is true economic development that's helping the Palestinian people. So we will take a look at efforts, including this piece of legislation here, to ensure that those elements are in there, and then we will make some decisions.
Let me just say to all my friends, if we didn't have 34 panelists, I know that everyone here appreciates all the work you do. And just following up on that, having been here for 30 years, I have spent a lot of my energy and focus on empowering the Palestinian and sending resources to groups that are really trying to make a difference. But this is worthy of an hour or two another time. So because we have so many people, I do want to thank you all on the panel. I look forward to continuing our work together. We have a great committee here. Some couldn't join us today, but I know that each and every one, bipartisan, cares very much about these issues, and I look forward to continuing to work in a bipartisan way. I wish we could provide strong bipartisan support for family planning, maybe someday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our second panel is Ms. Jean Burgolt, the President and CEO of Internews, Michelle Sumulis, a former colleague and partner on our committee, Managing Director of Bread for the World, and Mr. Bill O'Keefe, Executive Vice President of Catholic Relief Services. You know, I'd love to give a speech in every one of you, but I do know that as you come forward, Catholic Relief Service is doing such an amazing job in every place I visit, and I thank you. And of course, Bread for the World. We've known each other a long time, and I thank you. And thank you for reporting the news, Jean. Okay. Why don't we begin, Jean?
Great. Madam Chairwoman, I'm very honored to be here today on behalf of Internews, an international nonprofit dedicated to empowering local news all around the world. We do this because we believe that everyone, everywhere deserves to have the information they need to make good choices for their families, participate in their communities, and hold their governments to account. Unfortunately, our mission is facing a crisis, and I'll start with a devastating number, 13%. Only 13% of the world's population lives in a country deemed to have a free press. The causes of this crisis are multitude. Authoritarian regimes are directly restricting access to many, many people. Intimidations and attacks are making it harder for journalists to do their jobs. The rise of malign actors has made misinformation all the more pernicious around the world. And finally, the market realities of the media industry make local news almost untenable. And what this means on the ground is, in the countries that we work, that in places like Mexico and Guatemala, violence against journalists from criminal groups is equivalent to them working in a war zone. In Burma, hate speech has directly contributed to the genocide of the Rohingya people. And all over the world, from Cameroon to India, direct government censorship has taken a new path in completely shutting down the internet so people lose all access to information. The need for action is urgent. And with support of the U.S. Agency for International Development and Department of State, we at Internews are taking action. We're building the capacity of partners in these countries, local media, content producers, digital activists, to fight these trends, because we need together protect this incredibly valuable resource of trusted local information. I'd like to share several strategies that work. First, focusing on inclusion really works to build trust. People need to know that their news reflects them and their community. And we particularly are emphasizing women. Speaking of women's empowerment, we think it's critically important for women to be seen, heard, and listened to in the media. And unfortunately, only 24% of the people that you see, read about, or hear are women in the news, and that must change. Second, we believe that there is progress is possible in this space, and we're seeing advances in freedom of expression, particularly in places like Liberia, where the government recently passed a very hard-fought media law to decriminalize libel. Third, in order to survive volatile markets, we really need to strengthen the business skills of our partners. We want local news to thrive around the world, like our partner in Montenegro, whose online advertising revenues grew fourfold following a simple support and consultancy on improving their digital advertising systems. Finally, investing in critical thinking can make a real difference. In Ukraine, a combination of fact-checking sites, contests, and integrating media literacy into social science curricula has resulted in a 16% year-over-year increase in Ukrainians' ability to spot fake news. The bottom line at Internews, we believe the most important tool for combating fake news is to invest in real news, and we've seen an impact. Last year I visited Kabul, Afghanistan, where Internews has been working with USAID support since 2002. When we first arrived, Afghanistan was a near information desert with only one creaky state-run radio station functioning. We worked with communities that had never experienced their own media. We found media enthusiasts and helped them set up a whole new network of radio stations and television stations that now reach all 34 provinces of Afghanistan. 17 of these stations are women-led, and I am so proud of our ability to support the brave and courageous Afghan women journalists. Because of the hard work of Afghan's homegrown journalists, media has become the second most trusted institution in that country, and support to media is one of the great successes of the foreign aid program in Afghanistan. This kind of change doesn't happen overnight, and it's only possible through deep partnership with USAID, the Department of State, and legislators like you on this committee. I urge you to include language in the committee's fiscal year 2020 report to continue supporting independent media and internet freedom programs around the world. Thank you.
Well, I thank you. You hear so many negative stories. It's nice to hear some positive actions, and I thank you very much. Michelle Sumalis.
Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. Bread for the World is a collective Christian voice that urges our nation's decision makers to end hunger and poverty at home and abroad. I am so proud to appear before this committee, where I spent several years serving you and the House of Representatives as professional staff. I do understand the difficult task before you and appreciate the opportunity to share Bread's perspective. Before I start my testimony, I would like to lift up those who died in the Ethiopian plane crash and take a moment to remember their commitment to the people of the world. I want to start by commending the chairwoman for her strong statement in support of raising the budget caps quickly so that regular order can be restored. I also want to thank the committee for its unwavering support for foreign assistance and for the $20 million global nutrition increase that you championed in fiscal year 2019. Mothers and children will receive life-saving nutrition interventions that lay the foundation for an effective and prosperous life because of your efforts. But our work is not done. In fiscal year 2020, Bread for the World asks that this committee continue to support U.S. global leadership by lifting the budget caps and allocating $60 billion to the international affairs budget. In addition, we ask that you continue your strong support for poverty-focused development assistance. The burden of malnutrition remains unacceptably high and progress slow. Malnutrition underlies 45% of all child deaths under the age of 5 and puts those who do survive at risk of impaired brain development, lower intellectual capacity, and weakened immune systems. The reason to invest in nutrition programs is straightforward, as it lays the foundation for human health and development, especially during the first 1,000 days. That is why we ask that $250 million be appropriated to nutrition programs in the Global Health Programs account in fiscal year 2020. We also ask for increased investments in nutrition-focused implementation research to develop best practices. Malnutrition and food insecurity issues not only impact the countries where they occur, but also have regional impacts. In the United States, the impact of food insecurity is seen in the faces of migrants seeking asylum at the southern border. In a 2017 World Food Program survey of migrants from the Northern Triangle, the majority cited no food as a reason for leaving their country. The report states that there is clearly a link between food insecurity and immigration. More families are arriving at the border from the western highlands of Guatemala, where we know hunger and malnutrition rates are the highest. So we urge this committee to continue to be part of the solution by investing in the root causes of migration, creating economic opportunity, building nutrition, and strengthening the resilience of marginalized communities. We know that investing in people rather than physical barriers is a smart and moral decision. One of the greatest drivers of hunger is also protracted conflict. My colleagues have talked about the conflict in Yemen and its impact, but let me just share what's happening to children. 2 million children under the age of 5 are at risk of death from malnutrition in Yemen, and 24 million people, or double the population of Ohio, need urgent humanitarian aid. This crisis is man-made, and it is adversely affecting the population of Yemen. As a person of faith, I applaud Congress on both sides of the aisle for calling on the administration to insist all parties to the conflict stop the fighting, support the peace process, allow aid workers to reach those in need, and promote peace and economic recovery. In closing, the United States is an unprecedented spirit for good in the world. This committee on both sides of the aisle has shown true leadership and provided critically important humanitarian, health, and development assistance over the years. Whether motivated by spiritual beliefs or a commitment to the common good, your actions bring hope to a world in need, acknowledge the dignity and worth of each person, and create opportunities for all to grow into healthy, productive adults. Thank you so much for the opportunity today.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee. Catholic Relief Services is the international relief and development agency of the Catholic community in the United States. We operate in 110 countries, partner with almost 2,000 organizations, and serve more than 136 million people. Based on global needs, we respectfully request that the committee increase the international affairs budget to $60 billion and fully fund international poverty-reducing humanitarian and development assistance. I'll use my time today to discuss U.S. humanitarian leadership and localization in the context of USAID's journey to self-reliance. First, thank you, Ranking Member Rogers, for remembering the 4 CRS colleagues and other humanitarian workers from Save the Children, CARE, and UN agencies who were killed in Sunday's Ethiopian Airlines crash. CRS commends Congress's steadfast leadership to address humanitarian crises. Last year, I saw that leadership firsthand in northern Iraq. Thanks to U.S. humanitarian leadership and USAID, Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities are returning to their homes and rebuilding their lives. More needs to be done, but U.S. diplomacy and humanitarian and development resources are turning the tide. In the West Bank and Gaza, though, our government is allowing the tide of poverty and suffering to gather force. The administration has terminated all assistance to support Palestinians. Confusion around the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act has further eroded the ability for even reputable NGOs to provide assistance. These steps have increased hopelessness and risk regional instability. We urge Congress to make it clear that humanitarian aid is not in the scope of the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act and direct that humanitarian funding flow to closed programs despite an ongoing and apparently never-ending administration review. In Venezuela, millions of people face a dire situation and are leaving their country. CRS supports local Caritas partners in the region through focused technical assistance and accompaniment, and we are grateful for the U.S.'s commitment to respond to this crisis. In the future, though, U.S. humanitarian assistance to Venezuela and the region must be driven by assessed needs and in accordance with established international humanitarian principles. U.S. humanitarian leadership requires more than the allocation of funds. U.S. diplomatic engagement and broader political solutions are necessary to alleviate suffering and resolve conflict. As a blessed nation, it is our duty to promote peaceful and just societies in places such as West Bank and Gaza, Venezuela, South Sudan, and Iraq. We applaud USAID and Ambassador Green in particular for aspiring to support countries on their journey to self-reliance. CRS, in partnership with the U.S. government, empowers local leadership, builds local capacity, and strengthens resilience in communities. The Catholic social teaching principle of subsidiarity requires us to pass responsibility on to local actors where it belongs. As a PEPFAR Track 1 implementer, CRS successfully transitioned complex HIV treatment programs in 9 countries to local faith-based partners who now use national, regional, and local systems to achieve even better results than we could. With the Global Fund support, we have helped governments at all levels to strengthen health systems while attacking malaria. After 7 years of CRS's capacity strengthening, for example, the government of the Gambia recently replaced CRS as the co-principal recipient on a large Global Fund malaria grant. We have many lessons to share from our own experience transitioning assistance to local partners. USAID has set a worthy goal, but must provide sufficient time, resources, and support for local partners to grow. Paradoxically, helping countries along their journey to self-reliance will require more short-term funding if it is to yield long-term results. Pope Francis, in his January 1st World Day of Peace message, wrote, "Good politics is at the service of peace." We contend that good politics, policy, and programming are all at the service of peace and good development. Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your commitment to humanitarian development assistance and for the good politics you bring to U.S. humanitarian and development leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I know all of us in this panel have nothing but praise for the extraordinary work you're doing, and we express our appreciation. Mr. Rogers.
No question.
Ms. Frankel. You don't have to ask a question.
I do have to pick which question I can ask. I was just very interested in your testimony about, first of all of you, terrific, thank you very much. Very interested in your testimony about having to get more women in the media. Could you explain what is the relationship between getting more women in the media and how does that relate to a better life for the community?
Well, I mean, I think the obvious example is the representational value of it, for young girls to see women in full range of leadership positions, and that's often captured in the popular culture, in the media. So we need more women experts in the news advocating for the economy, advocating for politics, advocating for the environment, advocating for the full range of issues that affect the world. And that inspirational value is critical. And that's what you learn to trust your local news and information all the more when it reflects back at you the world you hope to see. So to me, that's the most important reason to engage the full community in the media, so that you have that representational value.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Ms. Sumalas, is that how you pronounce it? How's David Beckman? Give him my regards, please.
I will. We have a board meeting today, so he's
Okay.
there with them.
Good, wonderful, thank you. Let me turn quickly to you, Mr. O'Keefe. Thank you for mentioning the situation in northern Iraq and the work that's being done there. At the behest of the Vice President, I traveled there last summer to evaluate the significant funds that have been shifted there, to the administration's credit, to try to help the religious minorities who have been decimated by the ISIS genocide. I walked away with 3 words in my mind. It's possible. The aid has real possibilities. It's urgent. But the real long-term sustainability factor is security. In this regard, I am readying a resolution that calls upon the Iraqi central government to integrate Christians and Yazidis and religious minorities of other faith traditions, particularly minority Muslims, into Iraqi security forces with some degree of autonomy for the protection of their own areas. Now, while this isn't in your purview, I wanted to use the moment to leverage an opportunity to speak to this, because if we are to achieve the results that you are anticipating and make them whole for the long term, preserving Iraq's extraordinary ancient tapestry of pluralism, which is so essential to peace, security has to underlie this. So it's not necessarily a question, Madam Chair, but I wanted to use the opportunity to highlight this.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the panel again. As we can see, we are all so grateful to you for the important work you're doing, and the fact that we are trying to move this panel along does not reflect the seriousness and the commitment of your important work. So we thank you very, very much, and we look forward to working together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next panel. No kidding. We are pleased to welcome our panelists, and we'll begin with Dr. David.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Rogers, thank you very much for this opportunity to appear before the subcommittee on behalf of the American Councils for International Education. We are a nonprofit organization that administers U.S. government and privately funded exchanges and educational development programs in over 80 countries around the world. I am requesting today that the subcommittee recommend funding for the fiscal year 2020 of at least $700,900,000 for programs under the Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, or ECA. Further, I ask that funding within ECA for citizen exchange programs be at least at the current level of $111,860,000. I also ask that funding at a level of $3 million be recommended for research and training for Eastern Europe and the independent states of the former Soviet Union, or Title VIII program. In light of current challenges for the U.S. and our foreign policy objectives, region-to-region and people-to-people connections have acquired increasing importance in the United States. Strengthening U.S. relationships with countries near Russia, China, and Iran through educational and cultural exchanges is of particular significance and value at the moment. For decades, American councils has administered State Department programs that increase mutual understanding between the U.S. and the world. These programs benefit both the U.S. and the countries on which they focus, and I thank the subcommittee for its strong historic support of these activities. To be effective, U.S. public diplomacy must reach beyond English-speaking elites in foreign capitals. The non-Fulbright side of the State Department Exchanges account does precisely that. It provides for some of the most cost-effective and universally admired international education programs in public diplomacy today. The Future Leaders Exchange, or FLEX program, for Eastern Europe and Eurasia, and the Youth Exchange and Study, or YES program, for nations with significant Muslim populations were created by the Congress and boast today nearly 40,000 active alumni, almost all of which are under the age of 40. Most recently, we expanded the FLEX program into Central Europe, where the U.S. needs a strong voice. American Councils is also poised to relaunch this program in Uzbekistan as the first U.S. NGO to re-enter the country in over a decade. These and counterpart programs that place similar numbers of U.S. high school and university students overseas to learn critical languages like Arabic, Chinese, and Russian are preparing a generation of citizens who will better be able to deal with the economic and cultural complexities of the 21st centuries and who value leadership, entrepreneurship, and the rule of law. Alumni of these programs go on to play increasingly important roles in government, the private sector, and the NGO community. For these reasons, I ask that the subcommittee include in the legislation language in support of programs like FLEX, YES, and others I've referenced in my written testimony. With respect to foreign operations programs, I ask that the subcommittee support research and training in Eastern Europe and the independent states of the former Soviet Union, which provides U.S. policy-relevant research on the former Soviet Union and its neighboring countries. Without support for this type of scholarship, the U.S. risks a future without area specialists who can navigate the complicated relationships in and around Russia. Madam Chairwoman, as you proceed with the decisions in the fiscal year 2020 bill, I request that you continue to provide strong funding for the State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs and the foreign assistance programs, particularly those I've mentioned in the statement. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to present facts and evidence to the committee about the impact of U.S. foreign assistance and funding on the lives of women and girls around the world. The International Women's Health Coalition has, for nearly 35 years, worked to protect and promote the health and human rights of women and girls globally. We do this work in large part through close long-term partnerships with grantee organizations around the world, and it is our great honor to help amplify the voices of women and girls we partner with and their lived experiences right here in Washington. I'm going to speak about the global gag rule. The global gag rule is a discriminatory, dangerous, and devastating policy that denies women health care, undermines our global health investments, and forces providers to make heartbreaking choices. In early 2017, IWHC launched a documentation effort to capture many of these consequences. In partnership with local organizations, IWHC has, over the last 2 years, interviewed those affected by the policy in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Nepal. IWHC's research confirms prior findings that the global gag rule decimates healthcare services and harms women. It forces providers to choose between taking critical funding for a wide range of health services and providing the full spectrum of legal reproductive health care to women. As clinics lose their funding, contraception, maternity care, care for cancer, care for HIV, among other critical services, become out of reach. These impacts fall disproportionately on the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. In Kenya, one organization reported having to eliminate their community outreach programs due to loss of funding under the policy. noting that many patients could now no longer afford to seek health care. An organization in Nigeria told us they were no longer able to provide free contraception, and that in a country where over half the population lives below the poverty line, the cost was now prohibitive for many. In Nepal, a long-term project focused on strengthening health systems to deliver family planning in remote areas was forced to shut down early. One of IWHC's partner organizations, the Kisumu Medical and Education Trust, KMET, based in Western Kenya, detailed their dilemma. With USAID funding, KMET has grown its health network from 50 to 122 clinics, serving rural areas of Kenya where people often need to travel very long distances to access even the most basic health care. Many of these clinics are the sole health provider in their communities. The global gag rule puts KMET and organizations like it in an untenable position. Do they forego US funding and scale back medical services and close clinics? Or do they no longer offer rural Kenyan women the full range of reproductive health services to which they're legally entitled in their own country? Either way, women lose and are left without options. Throughout our interviews, we also heard a lot of dismay. Dismay at the US government for forcing an ideologically driven policy on recipients of foreign aid, often in contravention of their own national policies. Dismay that the US would make abortion, a medical service that is legal in the United States, harder to access for women in other countries. In Nigeria, where maternal mortality rates remain extremely high, one interviewee told us, "It's not American women dying, it is Nigerian women that are dying." Chairwoman Louie, your legislation, the Global HERAC, would end this deadly policy. It would make sure that organizations cannot be disqualified from receiving US funding because they provide legal abortion services with their own non-US funding. Passing this language as part of an appropriations bill would mean that organizations like KMET can focus on meeting the medical needs of their population rather than on US policy and the whims of Washington. Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify.
Oh, thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the committee, staff. I'm here having a little bit of nostalgia. I'm not testifying on the budget as I once did. If I did, I'd say two things. One, that we in the One campaign will join our colleagues in advocating for a robust 150 account, but also that we all need to remind members of this esteemed body, others in the executive branch, that while it may look like a cost-saving measure to cut the foreign aid budget, it's truly an expensive proposition over the long term. Today, I'd like to focus on one item in the budget, which is funding for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. And the reason for this is they are heading into their 6th replenishment in October. We've got a lot of progress, and I think can score a huge victory for the United States and for the world, but I think there's some risk that we could leave that victory on the field. Why should we continue to support the Global Fund? Consider the fact that today alone, 5,000 people contracted HIV, nearly 1,000 of them young women. After 10 years of steady declines in malaria, we're seeing an uptick because mosquitoes are developing a resistance to the insecticides that have been used. We all know the threat posed by drug-resistant TB, and only 25% of those multi-drug resistant cases are being diagnosed and treated. We believe that the Global Fund is uniquely positioned to take on these challenges. It's the largest funder of both malaria and TB and the second largest donor behind PEPFAR. Most significant, its financing and influence with national stakeholders is leveraged to ensure that those most vulnerable in need of services are reached. And by pooling the world's resources, they've got even greater impact. A few facts about the fund. Working with its partners, the fund has delivered incredible results. In its first 15 years, it's helped save 27 million lives. But importantly, it also helps low-income countries pool resources, allowing them to purchase medicines in bulk at a lower cost. For example, this saved $205 million in 2017. Historically, the U.S. has pledged to provide 1/3 of the Global Fund replenishment. This is intended to leverage commitments from other donors, and it works. And I can say that now as head of the One campaign, but also as having been someone who used that number to leverage other donors when I was in the administration. In 2016, based on this challenge that's embedded in the 1/3 pledge, Japan increased its pledge by 46%, Italy by 40%, and the United Kingdom by 38%. The Global Fund also encourages countries to increase their domestic investments in health so they are not fully reliant on donors. Global Fund co-financing requirements led to grant recipients committing 41% of their own funding to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria during the current replenishment cycle as compared with the previous. Their target is now 48%. The Global Fund obviously coordinates with PEPFAR, and in countries where both are present, they do join forces to scale up. This year, we will be out there in the US, France, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, and the Netherlands, and the EU to help the Global Fund achieve its replenishment target of $14 billion. We are intent upon using that challenge as a way to leverage greater contributions for those countries, and are asking Congress to send a strong early signal by appropriating $1.56 billion for the Global Fund for FY20. Now, I know this is an increase. We'd like an increase across the board, Madam Chairwoman, as I think all of us would here. But we honestly believe that this is a case where we've got enough progress to show that we can do it, but where we also know if the virus is moving faster than we are, we're losing. And so we want to get that victory over the finish line. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And I do want to say, because I can't resist, I do remember when Bono, and I'm sure my colleagues remember this, went on a
Kind of
trip
memorable.
with George W. Bush,
Yeah.
traveled around the world. And I would say, in my interacting with President George W. Bush, he looked at his work with HIV/AIDS as probably one of his, if not the major achievement. And that trip was forever impressed on his mind. So the One campaign can be responsible for making George W. Bush a hero. And certainly it's been an important event in his life, I know.
Well,
so I thank you.
If I may, just a quick point, and I think for all members, I think it was that bipartisan support for the fight against HIV and AIDS that helped build the foundation of bipartisan support that we see today, for example, in meetings like this. And it's been hugely impactful, I think, not only to all of us who care about this, but it sends a really powerful signal all over the world. So we're grateful that you're keeping up the tradition.
You notice I'm going from left to right because I can't resist, Francois, and I do wish that the issues about which you are so passionate were equally bipartisan, because I think in all the traveling I've done, and so many of us have throughout the world, you see the importance of women's health. So I thank you for your testimony. And what can I say, Dr. Patton? I've been an advocate for international education and exchanges for my whole life, so I thank you. So I won't ask any questions. I will turn to my good friend, Mr. Rogers.
I have no questions.
Ms. Frankel?
Because you have such a kind spirit of bipartisanship, I will control myself. But I really don't like that. Okay. I want to thank you for all being here. I want to ask a question about it. Oh, that's right. I gotta put this thing on. Okay. So the global gag rule, in terms of administrations, it's sort of been on and off depending on the president since Ronald Reagan. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then my understanding is I think it's been expanded even under this particular administration.
Mm-hmm.
Can you relate the differences that you have observed in terms of being on and off, and then, that impact, what you see as the differences, and then how this expansion has changed things?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It's been on and off since 1984, since President Reagan, and it used to be applied to the family planning budget line, which is about currently $600 million. Under this administration, it's been expanded to all global health assistance, so now it conditions $9 billion, more or less, of U.S. foreign assistance every year. And what it says is that foreign non-governmental organizations that take the money, U.S. government money, in global health, must now agree not to speak at all about abortion, must agree that in their clinics there'll be no referrals. There won't even be a pamphlet in the clinic telling women that they may avail themselves of abortion. And this is even in countries where abortion is legal, such as South Africa. So it interferes with the practice of medicine, obviously, but what it's also done is it's actually undone a lot of the investment that we've made in the United States for integration of services. You know, in the communities that I'm describing in Western Kenya, there is only one clinic, let's say, in a 40-mile radius. That clinic has to be a one-stop shop. It has to offer everything, HIV, maternity care, contraception, etc. And those clinics now have to make the choice. Do they agree to be gagged and leave women basically to quacks and to services that are not safe, or refuse the money and therefore, you know, lose the ability to serve as many women as they would like to. So it is harmful either way. And in this context, what we see is that a lot of young women now are presenting in Western Kenya at clinics with injuries from unsafe abortion. It's starting again because that's the immediate effect, is that as soon as that happens, people walk away from legal, safe abortion services and they're turned to the clandestine services. So it's extremely damaging. It undoes our investment. You know, we spend literally billions of dollars providing integrated care. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mr. Fortenberry.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to simply pass on, but frankly, it's impossible to have a spirit of bipartisanship around this particular issue, which is significant in that it reflects the deep cultural and philosophical divide in this country. And the whims of Washington are a reflection of the collective values of this country and the people they elect. So for those of us who cannot in good conscience subsidize abortion, nor ask our people who we represent to subsidize abortion either here or in foreign accounts, this conflicts with that. So we look forward to ways in which we can constructively work together to help women, particularly with maternal care, to help children, to be a participant in all of the extraordinary things that we do through our foreign service accounts.
With all due respect, since 1973, the U.S. has not funded abortions.
I don't think we're in a
abroad.
debate.
No.
Thank you.
I would just say to my good friend and colleague, I think it's important to clarify, which you were going to do, that the United States has never paid for abortion. So
That's correct. Yes, yes, that's not the point of the global gag rule. Yeah.
much. Our fourth panel, please come forward. She's good though, whatever. Welcome. Our fourth panel is Ms. Candace Debnam, co-chair of the Basic Education Coalition Board of Directors, Ms. Emily Rice, international president of Kiwanis International's Key Club, and Ms. Carol Stern, president for a very long time, and chief executive officer of UNICEF USA. I appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy and Ranking Member Rogers and members of the subcommittee for inviting me here today. I'm honored to testify on behalf of the Basic Education Coalition, a group of leading U.S.-based organizations and academic institutions working together to promote, expand equitable access to quality education. My name is Candace Debnam. I'm the co-chair of the Coalition's Executive Board of Directors, as well as the Executive Director of School to School International. We're extremely grateful for the subcommittee's continued support for international education. In addition to providing children with literacy, numeracy, and critical thinking skills, Basic education lays the foundation for sustainable economic growth, poverty alleviation, social stability, and participatory democracy. To enhance U.S. foreign assistance efforts and improve educational opportunities for children in need, we respectfully request that the subcommittee provide $925 million for basic education in fiscal year 2020, with at least $800 million provided as bilateral development assistance. U.S. bilateral basic education programs focus on increasing equitable access to education, providing early learners with foundational skills, and preparing youth for successful careers. Thanks to the support of this subcommittee, USAID's programs reached over 100 million learners in more than 40 countries between 2011 and 2017, including over 22 million children living in crisis and conflict settings. From my experience in this sector, this work has the power to dramatically shift the trajectory of individual lives, as well as communities and countries more broadly. We've made great progress to date toward the goal of education for all. However, the need to continue and renew our commitment to this work is paramount. 262 million children and youth are still out of school, and millions more are not learning the basic skills they need. By expanding access to quality education, we will provide these young people with the opportunity to lift themselves and their families out of the intergenerational cycle of poverty. In addition to the benefits that children themselves receive from access to quality education, strong national education sectors and programs are essential to global economic growth. As populations around the world continue to grow, U.S.-funded education programs will promote stability and expand access to global markets. Far too often, hardships such as poverty, displacement, disability, and discrimination inhibit children's ability to access a quality education. More needs to be done to ensure that access to education is equitable across all levels. All children, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, or place of birth, deserve the opportunity to learn and make a life for themselves. With protracted conflicts lasting years and internally displaced people and refugees, displaced for over a decade on average, generations of young people are at risk of missing out on the opportunity to fulfill their potential. Through formal and non-formal education programs, we can provide children and youth with a sense of hope and normalcy when their lives have been disrupted, while simultaneously promoting their psychological well-being and cognitive development. Congressional support for international education is vital if we want to truly achieve sustainable development in countries where we work. Thanks to the leadership of Congress and the passage of the READ Act, we are positioned to take our education development work to the next level. A quality education for all is the bedrock of societal progress, and the benefits of our investments now will be reaped by generations to come. The Basic Education Coalition looks forward to working with Congress to ensure that education remains a pillar of our foreign assistance, and that U.S. government strategy on international basic education is a success. Together, we can help alleviate poverty, strengthen societies, foster stability, and spur economic growth, both abroad and here at home. Thank you again for inviting me to testify before the subcommittee and for your continued support for international basic education.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be in front of you, and I greatly appreciate this opportunity to testify and represent the hundreds of thousands of supporters to UNICEF USA. I respectfully ask the subcommittee to provide $132.5 million as the U.S. government's fiscal 2020 voluntary contribution to UNICEF's core resources. I do so in response to my dismay, frustration, disappointment yesterday to the President's proposed budget, which omitted UNICEF entirely. This level of funding maintains the $132.5 million to UNICEF's core resources as the same level provided in the fiscal year 2019 Omnibus Consolidated Appropriations Act. I've submitted my written testimony and will just share a few thoughts with you at this moment. You know, we are so appreciative to the traditional support of the American people to the world's children. UNICEF works in 190 countries and territories, yesterday, today, tomorrow, and UNICEF USA in particular prides itself on working closely with the US government. And yet, as we sit here today, 15,000 children will die of causes we know how to prevent, but we're just not getting to them in time. 50 million kids are on the move, 29 million of them forcibly removed from their homes, sleeping on rocks tonight instead of in beds, losing out on their childhood, losing out on an education. If we do nothing, we are about to lose an entire generation. I've just come back from CAR, the Central African Republic. It is a country the size of Texas. 3/4 of it is in conflict. 600,000 people have been internally displaced. 1 in 3 children is severely malnourished. I spent my last day there with child soldiers, former child soldiers, who were being rehabilitated in a UNICEF program. I heard their stories. They told me of having guns put to their heads, being told to kill or be killed at the ages of 9 and 10. I listened to what the program was like, and when I asked them what compelled them to seek the help of UNICEF, why they were completing what was a treacherous program, what was difficult for them, I got 3 of the same answers from every child I spoke to. First, they're there because they really want to be part of a better world. Very sincerely, I heard that from all of them. Second, they told me the most difficult thing is forgiving themselves for the acts they've been forced to commit. And third, to a T, every one of them said, we want the world to see us for what we once were and what we still are, children. Children first. Children with no word before or after it, just children. I am proud to see what UNICEF has done there. I'm proud and appreciative of USAID's support, especially in Central African Republic, where I saw the logistics, the protection, the nutrition, all of the work and the support being made possible by your support. I thank you for this opportunity to testify. I will end just by saying we don't get to pick where we're born. We wouldn't pick a poverty zone, a conflict zone. We wouldn't pick malnutrition. We wouldn't pick losing out on an education. We would just be children. And as the adults in the world, we need to do better by them. Thank you.
Emily?
Madam Chairwoman, I'm Emily Rice, the 2018-19 Volunteer President of Key Club International, Kiwanis International's service organization for high school students. I'm a high school senior from Minnesota, and it is a privilege to be the first president of Key Club International to appear before this committee. Key Club International is a high school program of Kiwanis International consisting of over 266,000 members in more than 5,200 clubs in the United States and 37 other nations. I am appearing on behalf of Kiwanis to provide testimony in support of the Kiwanis UNICEF program to eliminate maternal and neonatal tetanus. We are seeking the support of this committee to recommend in fiscal year 2020 $2 million for maternal and neonatal tetanus. Tetanus is a preventable disease that kills 1 baby every 15 minutes. It is a terrible disease in which human contact exacerbates the baby's pain. A mother's touch hurts, leaving the baby to writhe in agony, upheld for days until he or she dies. In response to this tragic disease, Kiwanis launched the Eliminate Project. Kiwanis Eliminating Maternal and Neonatal Tetanus, a global campaign that will save or protect more than 61 million mothers and newborns. In partnership with UNICEF, Kiwanis is targeting the poorest, most underserved women and children on Earth with proven and cost-effective vaccine interventions. The Eliminate Project is also paving the way for other interventions that will boost maternal health and child survival. As part of this campaign, Kiwanis International committed to and has raised $110 million to immunize women in countries where MNT is still a major health threat. Key Club International is playing an important part in this effort. There are thousands of Key Club students my age in the United States and around the world raising funds for the Kiwanis and UNICEF effort to eliminate MNT. We are committed to this cause, just like our adult members of Kiwanis. I've been participating in the MNT Eliminate Project with my home Kiwanis Club, Key Club, and Builders Club for the past 5 years. Every year, we as a group review the effects, hardships, and tragedies that occur due to maternal neonatal tetanus. And it pains me to hear the stories of mothers who have lost their children due to MNT. When women are vaccinated for tetanus and learn about maternal health, they become empowered to take control of their well-being and that of their newborns. We believe these women matter. They deserve to give birth to healthy babies, and their babies deserve to achieve their full human potential. On behalf of Kiwanis International and the Kiwanis Children's Fund, I want to thank the committee for its support in the fiscal years of 2018 and 2019 appropriations for the $1 million in funding for M&T through public-private partnerships to prevent tetanus in newborn children. I hope that the committee will include $2 million for the M&T for the same purpose in the fiscal year 2020 State Foreign Operations Report. I also want to thank you for the committee's past and continuing support of our first global campaign for children, ending iodine deficiency disorders. We believe we have a very effective partnership with UNICEF and urge you to support UNICEF USA's for their core resource budget of $132.5 million. We also support funding for the maternal and child health account at a level of $900 million. The maternal neonatal tetanus elimination plans are in place. Countries are ready for implementation. All that remains is one final push for funding, one push to rid the earth of this devastating disease. Madam Chairwoman, as high school students here in the United States, we're doing our part. Won't you help us boost our efforts by recommending $2 million within the Global Health, Maternal, and Child Health account for the Kiwanis UNICEF efforts for the elimination of maternal and neonatal tetanus? Thank you for your consideration.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your involvement, for your commitment, and for coming to Washington and being so very eloquent. I'm sure we will respond accordingly. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Candice, as you know, I have been a strong, strong advocate for basic education. Shockingly, the FY20 budget request is only $299 million for basic education. I'm not going to take it very seriously, but I think we should all understand what a 62% decrease from current levels can do. What is the impact on the world's, not just women, children, families?
Yes, it's a great point. I'm glad to hear that this is something you're taking with a grain of salt as you consider your funding for the coming year. It will have devastating effects globally as well as in the U.S. A reduction of that amount will decrease both the opportunities for children to fulfill their human potential, which I think is a vital goal that we should all carry forward, but also have an economic impact here in the U.S. and internationally. Much of the economic power of the U.S. comes from developing purchases from developing countries, and this is an opportunity that education helps us build. So I think that it's both going to have devastating effects to the children that are affected day to day by a lack of opportunity to learn basic skills like literacy, numeracy, and socio-emotional development, but it's also going to be impacting citizens here in the U.S. as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers.
Mr. A particularly powerful presentation. Thank you. And we've got a new star on hand here. Emily Rice, what a good job you did.
Thank you.
And this is not the easiest place in the world to be at ease, but you have great poise.
Thank you so
work.
much.
By you.
Ms. Frankel.
Sorry.
You don't,
I
I'm
do have
just,
a question, I'm having a hard time hearing it because my.
well,
ears are
should I go
plugged.
to Mr. Fortenberry first and come back to you?
Yeah, that would be good.
Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it Ms. Denham? I'm sorry.
Debnam, yes, that's right.
Debnam. I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but I'll take the chair's word that it was uplifting, so thank you. Ms. Stern, I walked in the midst of yours. I have met with child soldiers in Western Africa, and in their presence, seeing the struggle to go from being withdrawn to being able to project their heart's desires was made very real for me. So this haughtiness, standoffishness, because of the deep wound in the soul and the scars in these children's psyche is very powerful. And the only reason I say this is because here we are as a government and we were subsidizing that particular program, and this was after in Liberia, after their war. Other countries run around and build things and build big, shiny, new stuff and attract the possibilities of those peoples. But the United States is digging deeper and trying to heal people from deep, deep wounds and scars like this. So I think a lot of times in hearings, we're asking for more and talking about this or that problem, but sometimes we got to go back and reflect on what we've done. And that was a beautiful gift for me personally to witness. Again, the U.S. subsidizing a group of young boys and a spiritual mentor and trying to return them to some basic humanity. So thank you very much for your impressive and heartfelt comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
One more thing, Madam Chair. I have to commend Emily as well, if I could turn now. I was in the Key Club, and I think Mr. Rogers is right, Chairman Rogers. This would have been highly intimidating to sit here at your age. Are you from Minnesota? Did I read that correctly?
I am,
Okay. Who is your congress member? Do you know? Where do you live in Minnesota?
Sections, District 5, so.
Who's the congress member? Oh, that's okay. Well, it's good you don't know, because they should be very aware of you potentially running against them. No, that's all right. Thank you for your excellent presentation. We appreciate it.
Ms. Franco.
First of all, thank you for being here. Kudos to you, Emily, again, for your high school. That's amazing. Very good. Ms. Debnam, is I saying that name? You are. So I want to ask you, there's research that shows that girls between the ages of 10 and 19 are 3 times more likely than boys to be kept out of schools, particularly in countries of conflict. Could you, from your point of view, what could be gained if we could keep more of those girls in school?
Right, and I think that's also a great question for you as well.
Even Emily can answer that if she wants.
So, go ahead.
I would just say that there is a direct correlation, girls in school. First of all, healthy mom is healthy child, so we start with that. Educated mom is educated child, so that's the next phase. Girls who stay in school are much less likely to be forced into early marriage. They are much more likely to interrupt that basic cycle of poverty, because education really is the best tool in the arsenal for that. They are also more apt to bring their communities together. Their lifespan is lengthened. I mean, on every single metric, you will see marked improvement if girls are educated.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, as you all know, this has been a passion of mine forever. So we'll make sure that that number that has been proposed by misinformed people in the administration will not stand. And we will continue to make sure that girls are educated to the best of our ability. Thank you very much to this panel. We appreciate all your good work. Welcome. Another outstanding panel. This is really one of my favorite days, because you're meeting such good, aggressive, active people who are really sending important messages. And hopefully we can respond appropriately. Our 5th panel is Mr. Jeremy Ben-Ami, President of J Street, Mr. Chris Collins, President of the Global Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, and Dr. Joanne Carter, Executive Director of Results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, other members of the subcommittee, for this opportunity to provide the pro-Israel, pro-peace movement's views on U.S. assistance for fiscal 2020 to our ally Israel, the Palestinian people, and to other partners around the world. We greatly appreciate how the leaders and the members of this committee have worked together for many years on a bipartisan basis to ensure robust appropriations in each of these areas. American assistance to Israel, including maintaining Israel's qualitative military edge, is an important anchor for the enduring U.S.-Israel special relationship, and any viable peace process will have to provide Israel with the confidence and assurance to move forward on a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a 2-state solution based on land for peace. J Street strongly urges the subcommittee to appropriate $3.8 billion in security assistance for Israel in fiscal 2020 in accordance with the 2016 MOU agreed to under President Barack Obama. Just as ensuring the security of Israel is a vital American interest, so is restoring and maintaining robust U.S. assistance benefiting the Palestinian people through both bilateral aid and funding of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, also known as UNRWA. J Street, therefore, urges you to include in fiscal 2020 appropriations not less than $360 million from the Migration and Refugee account to be made available to UNRWA, and not less than $225 million in economic support funds for assistance to the West Bank and to Gaza. U.S. assistance benefiting the Palestinian people has served as an essential component of efforts by lawmakers and administrations of both parties to enhance security and quality of life for both Palestinians and Israelis. There is broad consensus in Israeli and U.S. security circles that the essential humanitarian, health, and education services provided by such aid in the West Bank and Gaza, and in the case of UNRWA in neighboring countries, is critical to fighting the deprivations that exacerbate suffering, instability, and violence. We greatly appreciate the efforts being undertaken right now to find a workable fix to the unintended statutory hurdles preventing bilateral aid from flowing. Yet the most significant barrier to ensuring the crucial U.S. assistance reaches the Palestinian people is the Trump administration's decision to indefinitely cut off such aid and end U.S. contributions to UNRWA. These cuts are having a devastating impact, defunding food assistance services for tens of thousands of families, clinical breast cancer treatment for thousands of women, preventive and nutritional health services for thousands of children and their caregivers, and youth engagement for over 50,000 young people intended to stem radicalization. Top Israeli security experts have repeatedly warned that these cuts will undermine Israeli security by deepening Gaza's humanitarian crisis and further destabilizing the situation in the West Bank. Former IDF spokesperson Peter Lerner wrote, "In our region, poverty has been a breeding ground for radical recruitment, violence, and terrorism. Hardballing the Palestinians into submission is likely to blow up on Israel's doorstep." Yet the administration has ignored these warnings and those conveyed by Congressman David Price in a recent letter he co-authored with Congressman Peter Welch and Adam Smith, also signed by Congresswoman Barbara Lee and more than 100 of their colleagues, urging the administration to abide by Congress's intentions and restore this vital assistance. That is why, in addition to including a robust appropriation for this aid, J Street also urges the subcommittee to request the inclusion of directive bill language requiring the administration to actually disperse these funds within 60 days of bill enactment. Lastly, the same security, strategic, and moral considerations informing our support for generous U.S. assistance to Israel and the Palestinian people hold true when it comes to U.S. aid and diplomacy around the world. J Street therefore urges the subcommittee to ensure robust overall funding for global U.S. assistance, State Department personnel and operations, financial commitments to multilateral organizations, and related programming supporting peace and diplomacy. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify. I welcome and look forward to the opportunity to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Chris Collins?
Good morning, Chairwoman Lowy and Ranking Member Rogers and all the distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Chris Collins. I'm president of Friends of the Global Fight Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and the full subcommittee for your ongoing support over many years of America's leadership in the fight to end the world's deadliest epidemics. Today, I'm here specifically to thank you for your support of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and to request continued U.S. leadership in supporting the Global Fund. You may hear some similar comments as you heard from Gail Smith, but at least our facts are consistent, so that's the good news. This year, Congress has a unique opportunity to advance and accelerate the end of these three terrible epidemics. The Global Fund is the world's largest global health financer. Since its creation in 2002, Global Fund-supported programs and its partners have saved the lives of over 27 million people. This accomplishment includes helping to cut AIDS-related deaths in half since its peak in 2005, and contributing to a 37% decline in TB deaths and a 60% decline in malaria deaths since 2000. The Global Fund really is the great leverager in U.S. global health investment. By law, we can only provide 33% of total Global Fund resources, leveraging commitments from other donors. And in addition, our investments catalyze increased domestic health investments in affected countries whose commitments have increased 41% over the last 3-year cycle. Also, by strengthening local health infrastructure, the Global Fund helps prevent emerging epidemics from growing out of control and spreading. But the Global Fund and its partners still face significant challenges in ending these 3 epidemics. 7,000 adolescent girls and young women are infected with HIV every week. Over 40% of Africa's population is under 15, so scale up of HIV prevention and treatment for young people is imperative. This year, the Global Fund is holding its 6th replenishment. To put the world back on track to end the epidemics of AIDS, TB, and malaria, the Global Fund Secretariat projects that a minimum of $14 billion is needed for the 3-year replenishment cycle. At the same time, the Global Fund is asking recipient countries to also increase their own investments by 48% over that period. To continue our leadership and encourage other donors to increase their investment, Friends asked for a U.S. appropriation to the Global Fund of $1.56 billion in fiscal year 2020. We're also requesting language like that included in the Senate FY19 State Foreign Operations Report, noting the expectation that the subcommittee will maintain this funding level through the 3-year replenishment cycle. Together, the requested funding level and the report language will send an unequivocal message to other donors that the U.S. will maintain its leadership on the Global Fund, encouraging other donors to once again step forward with increased pledges. A $14 billion replenishment, along with those increased domestic investments, will lead to a reduction in the number of deaths from these diseases by half, saving over 16 million lives. Friends also encourages the subcommittee to increase funding in U.S. bilateral global health programs, which all work synergistically with the Global Fund, and that includes, of course, PEPFAR, the President's Malaria Initiative, and the USAID Tuberculosis Program. As you know, yesterday the administration proposed devastating cuts to the Global Fund and our bilateral global health programs. The proposal included cutting our 3-year contribution to the Global Fund by $1 billion and reducing the U.S. share of Global Fund support. So this proposed budget is more than just a funding cut. If enacted, it would signal a full-scale retreat in U.S. global health leadership. Part of our job now is to educate other Global Fund donors that the administration's budget will not, in the end, represent the U.S. commitment to the Global Fund in the coming replenishment. I am very happy that that decision rests with you. Thank you again very much for this opportunity.
Ms. Clotter.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee, RESULT is a movement of passionate, committed advocates working to end poverty. And on behalf of our grassroots in all 50 states, I just want to thank you for your incredibly important work to protect and increase effective and life-saving investments. So I'm grateful for the chance to share some key opportunities where we believe the committee's continued support could have enormous impact. You know, as we just discussed, nowhere has your leadership been stronger than for basic education. So I'd say first, you know, the Global Partnership for Education's new 3-year strategy, if fully funded, will put 25 million more children in school in the world's poorest countries. And a U.S. contribution of 125 million will be key to making this a reality. We also support the committee to provide full funding for USAID's basic education programs. And I'd also ask you to continue to monitor the implementation of USAID's new education policy, because we're concerned that the policy leaves the door rather wide open for supporting for-profit, fee-charging private schools. And for us, this is not a question of private versus public, but it's rather about protecting the enormous progress we've made in abolishing school fees as a huge barrier to education access in poor countries, especially for girls and the poorest kids. Regarding the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, you heard from Gail Smith and from Chris Collins about the critical opportunity about the replenishment. I just want to really make 2 points, or kind of emphasize 2 points. First, the data shows us there is literally no option for a maintenance scenario against these infectious diseases. We either invest to accelerate or we're going to lose ground. You know, as you've heard, drug resistance literally threatens to sweep away the gains that we've made, and The fact that every single day 1,000 adolescent girls and young women are getting infected with HIV is just one example and a horrifying indictment of our failure to reach those who are most vulnerable. But a successful replenishment of $14 billion can fundamentally shift that trajectory. We would cut deaths by over 50%, and we would cut new infections by over 40%, which is rather remarkable. And the other thing I'd say is I was just at the preparatory meeting for the replenishment in India, and other donors are watching very carefully for signals from the US. So support from this committee of $1.56 billion will be a hugely important signal to other donors and can leverage billions of dollars more in resources for a successful replenishment in October. I'd also just say that USAID plays a critical role alongside the Global Fund in fighting tuberculosis, which has now surpassed HIV as the single biggest infectious killer in the world. Last September, world leaders endorsed a bold target to find and treat over 4 million people that are being missed every year. They get sick with TB, being missed by their health systems. And USAID Administrator Mark Green announced an exciting new global TB accelerator to better track and drive the impact of our bilateral TB funding and to invest directly in local organizations. I would say a big thank you to this committee for providing $41 million in an increase in TB funding for fiscal year 19. And I'd say with USAID's strong new focus, the new tools that we have, and these ambitious but achievable targets, I would urge the committee to provide $400 million for TB for FY20 to really get ahead of this disease. And then finally, I just ask the committee and support you to continue the life-saving support for U.S. investments to end preventable maternal and child deaths by providing $900 million for maternal and child health programs, including $290 million for Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and $250 million for USAID's nutrition programs that you heard earlier from Michelle Similis about. And I'd also urge the committee to engage with USAID on how the Child and Maternal Survival Coordinator position can be strengthened rather than eliminated. And finally, just thank you all for your leadership on these issues, and we're really committed to working with you to advance and protect these programs. Thank you.
I must say that this is one of the best days of this committee because I get an opportunity to interact with people who are spending their whole careers just trying to do good things and make this a better world. And so I thank you all. And I just want to say, Jeremy, I remember being on the White House lawn when Yasser Arafat was shaking the hand with Mr. Begin. And we tried. We've been working on this for a very long time. And I certainly don't think that withdrawing the money from the West Bank and Gaza, making sure it's going to the right causes, making sure it's going to help the people, I think is essentially. But I know of your important advocacy, and I do hope we can continue to work together. It's been a long time I've been in this Congress working for 2 states, for 2 people, and we have no choice but to continue our advocacy, and hopefully we'll see that day. So I just want to thank you and thank all who are here today. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service. I yield.
Ms. Franklin.
Ms. Franklin.
Thank you all for being here. So I want to, is it Ben Ami? Is that how you say that? Thank you very much. I want to ask you a question. I have to read you something. This has to do with the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act. I'm sure you're familiar with that. So, it forces the Palestinian Authority to choose between accepting U.S. funding or being liable to lawsuits for terrorist attacks in the U.S. courts. It's my understanding that now Palestinian Authority said they wouldn't even accept
Any funding.
Any
Right.
funding. So, or I guess I'm only allowed to ask one question, but do you think the law should be changed to allow for humanitarian aid, or how do we get around that to provide the humanitarian aid and to allow for money to go for security?
Thank you for that question, and thank you as well for the chair's remarks and her commitment to these issues. It is a bipartisan priority to find a fix to ATCA, which is the statute that was passed in October and has resulted unintentionally, I believe, in these complications. The aid that is being prevented is both American assistance to security, training of the Palestinian security forces, as well as humanitarian and other economic support programs. The solution is being sought on a bipartisan basis in both houses of Congress, because I think there's a recognition it's an American national interest and an Israeli security interest, as well as a humanitarian interest, to find a resolution to this. So there is a lot of work going on in other committees to try to figure out a way out of this, and I hope that there is a solution that can be found soon.
Before I turn to Mr. Fortenberry, I'm just looking at I think it was a memorable day, but it was Mr. Arafat and Mr. Rabin.
Yes.
And I think I did not say that. I'm just thinking right now what I said.
Yeah.
So I wanted to clarify, because that was such an extraordinary opportunity for me, being in the audience, and so much of my career, as yours has, is trying to bring about a peaceful resolution, 2 states for 2 people. So I wouldn't want to change history with the wrong
And
name.
I was there as well with you.
I remember that
Yes.
very well. So thank you. Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, Dr. Carter, do you know Dr. Frances Moore from Bellevue, Nebraska?
I don't.
Well, she's your
Oh,
biggest.
yes, of course, Fran Moore, yeah.
Yes, Fran.
Yeah.
She here? Did I hear? I wouldn't be surprised if she was here, because she is your
yeah.
biggest advocate, and
Yeah.
all of us have constituents who are highly engaged with us, and you should give Frances the Gold Star Reward
Well,
from results.
if they're watching, and I will let them know, and I would say she's also a huge admirer of yours and really grateful for your longtime support on many,
We have good
particularly many of these
discussions.
global health issues.
Thank you.
Thanks for your leadership.
I want to thank you again, this distinguished panel. As I've said all day, this is one of my favorite times, because there's so many good people out there doing good work, and it's always disappointing that we can't solve all the problems today. But thank you so much for your appearance.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again to another very distinguished panel, Mr. Thomas Sussman, nice to see you, Anthony Banbury, a pleasure, and Kate Wall, welcome.
This is a fine day, isn't it?
It is.
Great way to get the message through. Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers. My name is Tom Sussman, and I'm a strategic advisor and international policy coordinator for the American Bar Association, appearing today on behalf of our president, Bob Carlson, and our more than 400,000 members in the United States and abroad. And I'm here to emphasize the importance of U.S. leadership, of congressional leadership and support for the promotion of democracy and human rights and the rule of law. The ABA appreciates the bipartisan agreement in Congress that programs to promote rule of law internationally are valuable and cost-effective investment of U.S. taxpayer dollars. Surely these programs support national security and economic opportunity, but that's not all. They're also consistent with our values as a nation. The ABA urges continued support of democracy, human rights, and governance programs by providing $2.4 billion for these democracy programs in fiscal 2020. As a longtime implementing partner of DRG programs, the ABA can assure Congress that they work. There are significant returns on investment. For over 30 years and in more than 100 countries, the ABA, through its Rule of Law or ROLI initiative, Center for Human Rights, and Section on International Law, has been protecting human rights and promoting justice, economic opportunity, and dignity across the world. We do so through a model that emphasizes partnerships with local stakeholders and that leverages pro bono services from the U.S. legal community. In fact, we've estimated that over the years, lawyers have contributed pro bono legal services of over $200 million to date through the many programs that we are involved in. The ABA has an organizational framework in place to respond to requests for assistance from every region of the world, and we provide expertise in virtually every area of the law. In 2018, ABA Rowley carried out 102 programs in 50 countries, with funding coming from the Department of State, USAID, and other multilateral donors and private foundations. Let me suggest some highlights. The prepared statement contains greater detail. Our partnership with USAID and state not only reflect our values, but also advance the interests of the United States. For example, we've been very active in efforts to reduce crime and violence in Central America, a key driver of forced migration, by training over 6,400 justice sector actors on topics such as crime scene investigation, litigation skills, forensics, hate crimes, and trafficking. In partnership with the State Department, ABA Rowley is long engaged in the fight against slavery and combating sexual and gender violence. An example is Sub-Saharan Africa, where ABA Rowley continues to struggle against slavery and forced child labor. To date, our efforts have resulted in the freedom of over 300 slaves and ensured access to justice for over 11,000 victims of sexual and gender-based violence. The ABA is also working to protect human rights around the world through a network of pro bono law firms, clinics, and lawyers. The DRL-funded Justice Defender Program provides pro bono legal assistance, monitors trials, and advocates on behalf of over 1,000 human rights defenders in 63 countries. The program provides cost-effective support for advocates to the front lines on the front lines of attempts to undermine democracy and the rule of law. None of this would be possible without your support. Congress's financial support of DRG programs is critical to promoting the rule of law and building sustainable local capacity. This is a time-tested, cost-effective component of U.S. foreign assistance designed to foster democracy and promote economic development. We believe that these programs provide a foundation for security, stability, and prosperity, both in the United States and abroad. Thank you for your support in the past, and we welcome your continuing support in the future.
Thank you for joining us today. Mr. Banbury.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, members of this committee, distinguished members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Tony Banbury. I'm the new president and CEO of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, known as IFES. I spent 5 years working in the U.S. government, including the National Security Council under President Clinton and President George W. Bush. I want to thank this Congress, the House Appropriations Committee, and this subcommittee for the consistent bipartisan support for democracy promotion and electoral assistance, particularly the $2.4 billion set aside for democracy programs. As this Congress has long recognized, democracy abroad serves U.S. national interests. Free and democratic societies advance our values and our national security and provide safe environments for our citizens and our businesses. Chair Lowy, when you first convened this subcommittee in, this year, when Administrator Green was testifying, you said that USAID helps the world's most vulnerable people, assists in the recovery of millions from natural disasters and conflict, and supports democracy and the rule of law. These development efforts are on the front line of our national security, and this is so true. However, democracy and elections and our national security are under attack. In that same statement, Chairwoman Lowy, you said this is a tumultuous time around the world. Globally, democracy is in crisis. The right to free and fair elections, freedom of the press, and the rule of law are under assault. I fully agree with this assessment. We need to act with speed, commitment, ingenuity to defeat this assault and overcome this crisis. But we have not yet marshaled the forces necessary to win this war, and the anti-democratic forces are making big gains around the world. Following the end of the Cold War, there was a belief in the inexorable march of democracy. Countries would move from an authoritarian camp into the democratic camp and then move down the path of democracy, maybe a little windy and bumpy, but inexorably move down that path. We can no longer be safe in the assumption that that march of democracy is inexorable. From Poland to the Philippines, we are seeing backsliding on the path. Worse yet, as we see now in Venezuela, we see the terrible impact when a country moves from a democracy back into authoritarianism. There's a new constellation of threats to democracy and electoral integrity that could undo decades and billions of dollars of U.S. support for democracy around the world. Authoritarian leaders are using sham elections and the veneer of democracy in order to cling to power. Russia and China are actively engaged in attacking the democratic model of government. China is seeking to offer an alternative model to our democratic model, often with financial inducements. And in that same initial hearing, Ranking Member Rogers, you talked about the threats posed by Russia and China to democracy around the world. Technology is being weaponized. Social media platforms and the hardware and software of elections are now active battlefields in the fight to promote democracy and secure U.S. national interests. IFAS is seeing this every day in the countries where we work. It is not uncommon for there to be 2,000 attacks per month on voter lists and electoral result tabulations. And that number goes up to around 1 million at the time of elections when bot networks are activated. The external environment in which democracy promotion and electoral assistance takes place is changing rapidly, but we have not kept pace with those changes. There's a war being fought now over the democratic model, with hostile forces deploying second and third generation technological weapons. Our partners are turning to us for answers, for help, and we are responding with first generation tools. And this problem is only going to get worse. Malign foreign actors are committed, well-resourced, and determined. New technologies such as deep fakes and quantum computing are going to have a profound effect on society, democracies, and elections. Democratic forces need to be more determined, more committed, more agile, faster and smarter than the anti-democratic forces, but we are not there yet. We need a new toolkit, and the stakes could not be higher. To wrap up, as the foremost promoter of democracy, the United States needs to lead and to act, to counter today's challenges and to prepare for tomorrow's. I'd like to leave with just a few recommendations for the committee. One, please continue what works. The $2.4 billion set aside for democracy programming is valuable and necessary, but insufficient. Two, please look to the future. The Asia Reassurance Initiative Act that was signed into law on December 31 to promote democracy, human rights, rule of law in the Indo-Pacific region is an excellent model, and we urge full appropriation for ARIA funds. Three, please consider innovating. Consider a DARPA for democracy. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency makes, quote, pivotal investments in breakthrough technologies for national security. We need similar investments on a smaller scale to develop new tools to advance our national security by promoting and protecting democracy and electoral integrity around the world. And then finally, we need to fund democracy support in middle-income countries that had moved into democracy and now are at the risk of backsliding. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the committee and staff, thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony. I'm Kate Wall, Senior Legislative Manager with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. IFA has 17 offices globally and works in more than 40 countries around the world. We take a holistic approach to innovating solutions to tough conservation challenges. Recognizing the unbreakable link between animals and human well-being, we support and empower communities to coexist with and value native wildlife and help those communities develop tools to protect their wild heritage. International conservation is closely linked to human health and global stability, so cuts to conservation programs will always have effects on wild species and humans alike. Wildlife and wildlands are in peril around the world. Climate change, habitat destruction, and other pressures threaten wildlife ecosystems and the very fabric of this planet we call home. Wildlife trafficking continues to push animals to the brink, and scientists warn that species are disappearing so fast that evolution can't keep up. However, if we invest wisely now, we can make inroads against these pernicious threats and preserve healthy ecosystems and wildlife populations for ourselves and generations to come. In the interest of time, I will focus on just 3 important programs here today. First, USAID biodiversity programs support conservation efforts in more than 50 countries in partnership with foreign governments, NGOs, the private sector, and local communities. Biodiversity loss fuels food insecurity and poverty, contributes to political unrest. The wide-ranging USAID biodiversity programs tackle direct threats to wildlife and ecosystems, like habitat loss and resource degradation, and also address underlying issues to prevent biodiversity loss, including promoting peace and stability, health and human well-being, and improved livelihoods. USAID biodiversity programs protect not only our natural ecosystems and wildlife, but are critical to our national security interests, economic prosperity, and global stability. So IFAW requests $300 million in FY20 to fund these important programs. Next, USAID sustainable landscape programs promote sustainable land use, reducing deforestation, strengthening environmental resilience, protecting waters, and conserving biodiversity. Programs focus on areas where degradation is rampant and leverage private investment to reduce deforestation and improve forest health around the world. IFAW requests $135 million to fund the USAID Sustainable Landscapes programs in FY20. Finally, U.S. Department of State and USAID wildlife trafficking programs support ongoing efforts to combat the illegal wildlife trade, which remains the 4th most lucrative criminal industry worldwide. Sophisticated wildlife trafficking syndicates generate more than $8 to $10 billion annually, and evidence demonstrates a link between wildlife trafficking and other criminal enterprises, including illegal arms, drugs, and even terrorism. Anti-wildlife trafficking programs focus on fighting poaching, improving global enforcement and prosecution, disrupting networks, and reducing consumer demand for wildlife programs. These programs are critical both to global conservation efforts and to U.S. security. U.S. leadership also motivates other nations to protect wildlife and combat trafficking. IFAW requests $100.7 million to fund State Department and USAID wildlife trafficking reduction programs in FY20. In closing, we appreciate the opportunity to share IFAW's priority requests for the FY20 ASFOPS Appropriations Act and the continued support of this subcommittee for global conservation efforts. Thank you.
Let me thank the entire panel, and if we didn't have so many more people testifying, I would like to continue this discussion. But Mr. Banbury, I think what you are saying is really a wake-up call. Some of us have been awakened, but I'm very, very concerned about the sweep of anti-democratic forces, not just in Europe, but frankly throughout the world. And I do hope that the expertise, Mr. Sussman, and your expertise can certainly be an education for all of us who are so concerned about this. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your no questions.
Ms. Frankel,
Okay,
do you have a question?
I do, even though I was told to limit my questions.
Only because we have how many more people today?
But I do, one thing in my travels around the world, I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee for several years. One thing that I saw as a common theme in dysfunctional governments, especially where there have been overthrows of governments, it was corruption. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that, if there are any programs that actually even work to reduce it.
Anti-corruption programs all are founded on a justice system that of independent judges with trained prosecutors with access to counsel, and that's what a number of these programs across the world are based on delivering. And in the end, I think a lot of the population believes that they deliver justice.
I would just say, ma'am, that the very best program to counter corruption is a robust democracy where people can throw out corrupt leaders when they see them. Thank you.
And on a more micro scale, we certainly see funds from wildlife trafficking and illegal poaching going to fund corrupt governments. So interventions that help to stem the flow of illegal wildlife trafficking do help to stem the flow of corruption as well.
Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you all for your testimony. Just very briefly, Ms. Wall, are you familiar with the Delta Act?
Yes,
Good.
yes, and thank you so much for your leadership on
dig
that.
deeper there, because I think it intersects with all the good things that you were saying and creates the real possibilities for tri-national conservation area here, leveraging important diplomatic outcomes as well.
Well, sir, as a leader on the Act, you're probably more expert in it than I am. However, the Delta Act would provide support for programs in the, I'm going to mispronounce the name, the Okavango Delta in Africa, where wildlife trafficking and conservation have been in, wildlife trafficking and other pressures have caused degradation, and the Delta Act will help promote conservation efforts through public-private partnerships, through NGOs and other.
We're excited about it.
We're very excited about it as
Good.
well, and we look
Thank you.
forward to working with
I'm
you.
sorry,
Thank
I
you.
think we're all under time constraints. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you again to the panel. We look forward to continuing the dialogue. I have this, it's fine. Should get rid of this. Welcome. We were just saying that even for those members that have to move on to another hearing, this is such a display of all the good work that we're doing. I'm delighted to welcome this panel. Mr. Vince Blazer, Director, Frontline Health Workers Coalition. Ms. Jody Winteroff, the Senior Vice President of the Human Rights Campaign. And Ms. Mary McQueen, the President of the National Center for State Courts. Why don't you begin?
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, Representative Frankel, Representative Fortenberry, for the opportunity to testify on behalf of InterHealth International, which is based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Representative Price's district. InterHealth houses the Frontline Health Workers Coalition Secretariat here in Washington. I first wanted to second the comments made by Bill O'Keefe of Catholic Relief Services earlier today regarding the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act. InterHealth's Palestinian Health Capacity Project, which reduced referrals from West Bank health facilities to Israeli hospitals by 34%, was terminated at USAID's request on January 31st. The 120,000 plus patients that were affected by this closure was a reminder of the urgent need for a clear direction on humanitarian assistance in the West Bank and Gaza. InterHealth recommends urgent investment in strengthening the frontline health workforce in communities of least access, an intervention critical to maximizing the impact of U.S. global health appropriations. We urge the subcommittee to pass the Global Health Council's evidence-based FY20 recommendations of $7.05 billion for State Department global health programs, $4.39 billion for USAID, and $435 million for water in all accounts. Frontline health workers have been critical to the reduction of under 5 deaths by more than half since 1990, the near 55% decline in annual deaths from HIV since 2005, and the 63% cut in malaria deaths from 2000 to 2015. Recent research has also upended traditional economic thinking that framed training and paying health workers as a cost. A 2016 World Bank report found that the effects of higher health sector employment are even greater than that of the financial sector. The 9-to-1 return on investment in health holds particular potential for women, who comprise 70% of the health and social workforce worldwide, compared to 40% across all sectors. Thanks in part to the leadership you have shown, Chairwoman Lowy and Representative Diaz-Balart and members of the subcommittee, the U.S. has played a critical supportive role in the adoption of Workforce 2030, the first ever global strategy for the health workforce, and a subsequent action plan to catalyze the investments and policies needed to achieve it. The action plan recommends assistance to focus on countries currently least able to ensure a sustainable health workforce. Now, this centers on the reality that people who die of preventable causes are most likely living in the same communities with the least access to frontline health workers, as the recent outbreaks of Ebola have tragically shown. To have the greatest impact in saving lives and halting epidemics, safe access to sustainable frontline health workforce teams must be at the heart of U.S. global health programming. Because health workforce strengthening efforts are supported across several SFOPS accounts, the subcommittee should provide the flexibility agencies need to support locally tailored workforce solutions and to hold to account existing efforts. For example, major needs remain unmet in pre-service training institutions and bridge to employment programs in or near communities with little to no access to health workers. We recommend the subcommittee ask agencies to annually report on their collective frontline health workforce pre-service, education, recruitment, training, retention, connectivity, and safety efforts, so future appropriations can be guided toward the highest impact interventions. And we urge the subcommittee to support an evidence-based appropriation to global health programs that can save lives, foster economic growth, and ensure global health security. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Maybe it's not on. There we go. My name is Jody Winterhoff, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Political Affairs at the Human Rights Campaign. It is our first time testifying before this particular subcommittee, so we thank you for having us. It says it's on. How's that? Okay, good. Sorry, I have a cold. My ears are plugged. I think you do. We are America's largest civil rights organization working to achieve lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, and queer equality. We represent over 3 million members and supporters in this country. I'm testifying today in support of funding to defend and advance the human rights of LGBTQ people around the globe. Even as the Congress tomorrow will introduce the Equality Act, which would provide civil rights protections for LGBTQ people in this country and move our country to a more perfect union, it's being introduced with historic bipartisan support by members of this body and beyond. It has business and business leader support, over 200 organizations, public support at 70%. Nevertheless, LGBTQ people around the world face daily challenges to be who they are, safe from violence and death. In 69 countries, same-sex activity is criminalized, and in up to 10 of those, it is punishable by death. In Chechnya, authorities have detained, tortured, and even killed people based upon their sexual orientation or their gender identity. Authorities in Indonesia have publicly flogged LGBTQ people in front of jeering crowds of thousands. Around the world, nearly 3,000 transgender people were murdered between 2008 and 2018 because of their gender identity. Nonetheless, LGBTQ advocates around the globe continue their truly inspiring and courageous work. They are activists like Caleb Orozco in Belize. Despite threats against his life and enormous legal battles and barriers, he successfully challenged his own government's colonial-era law outlawing homosexuality in 2016. Or Hazel Magathi, an HRC global innovator who worked to hold the first-ever transgender pride event in Botswana in October. Or Tu Lee, a former fellow at the Human Rights Campaign who works at the Institute for Studies of Society, Economy, and Environment in Vietnam. They conduct research on vulnerable groups in Vietnam and then use the evidence to advocate for equal rights for LGBTQI people and ethnic minorities. Or Georgian activist Levan Berednidze, who, along with a friend, was attacked and beaten by a mob shouting homophobic slurs. When the victims sought help from the police joined in the attack rather than protecting the victims. Nevertheless, the Georgian LGBTQ community responded by calling on their government to conduct an investigation and punish the police officers involved, and also to create and implement a hate crimes policy. These are just a few examples of the incredible work being done around the globe, but it cannot happen without your help. That's why we strongly support the work of the State Department's Global Equality Fund, a public-private partnership supporting organizations that promote the inclusion and dignity of LGBTI people. We also strongly support USAID's incredibly important LGBTI work in their Human Rights Division. The need for funding in these two accounts far exceeds the funding currently available. The State Department receives about 4 times more LGBTI-specific solicitations than they receive for non-LGBTI human rights programs. We therefore urge the committee to provide $10 million to the Global Equality Fund and increase to $6 million USAID's LGBTI portfolio to begin addressing that imbalance. Congress has a crucial role to play in advancing this work and protecting human rights around the globe. We must support LGBTQ human rights advocates to continue their innovative and inspiring work to change the hearts and minds of their leaders, their fellow citizens, and their communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. McQueen.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, and I wanted to also thank you, Congresswoman Frankel. I feel like I need to channel Chief Justice Janet DeFiore and Charles Kennedy and say, if it please the court. And as part of that, I would invite staff, because I know how very important it is behind the scenes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. So the National Center for State Courts was founded in 1971 by then Chief Justice Warren Burger and the Chief Justices of all the state Supreme Courts. And I think you can say, well, why courts? Why justice? Why rule of law? And I don't think we have to look any further than the Constitution as a model, because in the words of the preamble, establishing justice was the foundation before ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, promoting general welfare, and securing liberty. In other words, all the issues that you have heard today that are so important to this committee, whether it's health care, gender identity, personal security, personal property, forced migration, a stabilized economy, freedom of the press, or families, all depend on a free, stabilized, and independent rule of law and judicial program. So the National Center for State Courts, working with the Conference of Chief Justices, have established judicial reform programs in over 80 countries. And we use a partnership, a community engagement, youth, values, vulnerable populations as a way to do that one-on-one sharing, to improve government accountability, to improve access to justice, and to promote media freedom, to ensure fair and open elections. As Margie Marshall, the former Chief Justice of Massachusetts, who actually grew up in South Africa, said, justice and the rule of law is like oxygen. You don't know how much you need it till somebody steps on the hose. And so I think that all of the things that you want to do, that we want to accomplish for the United States as well as our international partners, is through a stabilized rule of law. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If we want to have reliable democratic partners, if we want to have stabilized economies, we have to have a rule of law that will enforce contracts, that people can rely on, that everyone will be treated the same, that will apply the same laws and values. And so part of what we do is go in and actually help legislative leaders draft constitutions, write the statutes, talking about what are the values. Because we can sit here and say, well, you're innocent until you're proven guilty, until you go into an Eastern European country that shifts that burden that you're guilty until proven innocent. And so you have to help when you're working on these types of legislative reforms to really engage the population. I'll give you another example. Morocco worked very hard to establish women's rights, really especially for marriage issues and domestic violence in children. But what we found that was really unanticipated was how strong the cultural influence was. Because even though you had the right to go in and be treated equally in a court, to not lose your children in a divorce, the cultural values was so deep that no one would make themselves available to enforcing those. So I want to talk just real quickly about some new programs, most recently in Central America: Costa Rica, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Panama. And what we know there is a lot of the gang violence is really from recruiting from a lot of the drug cartels, young men especially. And so we've established a restorative justice program that basically diverts first-time offenders to try to develop a restitutional and education option instead of jail, to try to break that cycle. I would have to say that that in Kosovo, working with the bar and working with the courts, and especially to establish a judicial council, and I know earlier you talked about the need to make sure that these democratic institutions represented all the communities that were there. And so we ensured in Kosovo that the Serbians were at the table as well as the Kosovars in moving forward to implement the new justice system in Kosovo. And so some of our visitor programs, we've had the first women judges in Egypt, which was a major accomplishment. We've most recently, and this fall, we'll be hosting an international conference for judicial training institutions, judicial colleges, in South Africa. And so finally, I just wanted to share with you that I was in it was kind of like a street fair, and we had booths set up for different institutions in the judicial system, and one was a crisis center. Because human trafficking is a major, major challenge in the Balkans. And without having the capacity or any place to go, sometimes you find young women whose families actually sell them into slavery as an economic development. And a young woman was standing kind of on the side, and I looked over, and she kind of looked like she wanted to come speak to us, but didn't. And so finally I just went over and started talking to her. And she started crying because she did not know that there was an option for her through a crisis center. So I think the most important thing we could hope for is that when somebody feels that they're being threatened, that they don't come to the police department first, they may come to the courts. So I thank you on behalf of our country's chief justices, judicial leaders, and really urge you to support and expand the efforts of the State Department and USAID to strengthen judicial reform and especially emphasize the need for international rule of law.
Thank you. Ms. Franklin?
Thank you. That was really interesting testimony. This was Ms. McQueen, I have seen firsthand some of the issues you're talking about, because I was in one of the Eastern European countries. They're complaining that they want more American economic development, so forth. Oh yeah, and we're saying to them, you got to have a rule of law. You can't have to bribe the port officials and all that. But that's not my question. My question is to Ms. Winterhoff. What are the, in terms of, I guess, USAID or any American initiative, what are the best initiatives to try to change either the culture or the laws in the countries that are being discriminatory?
Well, it can vary by country. And so really what we try to do is work with the groups in that particular country to bring forward their voices about what changes are needed. You know, we do share experiences. One of the things we do is we have an international group of fellows that we bring together to let them talk to each other. So Caleb has been part of that program and others that I mentioned, so that they can talk about what they're finding success with in their countries, and then we can work to help support those efforts. It really does vary, but it's almost like thinking about what's happening in this country, but go back like a few decades in terms of people being in the closet. There are not, support for people at work and things like that. So, you can get the international businesses to actually start speaking out. That's safe spaces. So the people speaking out in many of these countries, truthfully, are more allies at first than some of the folks in these groups. The folks who are leading these local groups are so brave. It's extraordinary what they do. And so, but working with them to figure out what the challenges are in the country and then how to meet those challenges.
So, are you saying that that's where the USAID effort should be, to help these local groups?
Well, not only. It should be in great part, though, because those groups are the ones that are going to really work to make change. I mean, we have other programs that we do at HRC, but there are many partners who also do work in this space. But you do have to start with the local groups or the individuals in the country to know what's best in those places.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Appreciate your appearing before us. And our 8th panel, we still have a few more. Ms. Joan Rosenhauer, Executive Director of the Jesuit Refugee Service, USA. Ms. Alice Albright, Chief Executive Officer of the Global Partnership for Education, and Ambassador Stevens, Vice Chair of the Board of the Asia Foundation. Thank you very much. Thank you for appearing before us today. We can begin with you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee on behalf of the Asia Foundation. I am proud to serve as Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees. Thank you for your support of the foundation. We are grateful for the confidence that you have shown in our programs and our ability to advance American interests in the Indo-Pacific region. The Asia Foundation advances the interests of the United States by supporting stable democracies, good governance, the rights of women, and free markets in Asia. To build on Congress's investment in the foundation, the Asia Foundation is asking for $19 million for fiscal year 2020, a modest increase of $2 million over current funding of $17 million. This increase will enable us to sustain our programs and expand technology programs to boost economic empowerment, fight misinformation and cybersecurity threats, and bolster democratic governance. These funds will also enable the Foundation's re-entry into Pacific Island nations, important to U.S. interests, responding to the need for democracy and governance, women's security and empowerment, and disaster risk management. Established in 1954, the Asia Foundation is a private, nonprofit, non-governmental organization headquartered in San Francisco. We operate through 18 country offices in Asia. Foundation representatives maintain important relationships with Asian governments and leaders, and at the same time maintain links to local communities built on decades of trust and ongoing engagement. We have appreciated the past support of the committee in rejecting proposed cuts, and we hope that you will do so again. We ask that you consider this increase for the foundation, given American interests in the Indo-Pacific region, as signaled by the enactment of the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act in December. Appropriated funding is critical to the Foundation's ability to continue operating. The Foundation is an especially cost-effective investment for the Congress in a time of budget constraints. We make the most of the taxpayer dollar by leveraging resources. Over the last decade, every dollar appropriated to the Foundation has made it possible to raise roughly $4 from non-U.S. government sources. The committee is familiar with the Asia Foundation's work, so I won't go into great detail, but I will say, from my own 40-plus years of experience in South Korea, I have seen firsthand how the Asia Foundation and its programs contributed to South Korea's economic and democratic blossoming as a full partner of the United States, and how much those efforts are still appreciated by Koreans today. South Korea is just one example of how the Foundation contributes to the U.S. strategy of balanced engagement by working with countries in transition from assistance recipients to enduring diplomatic, economic, and security partners. It is the Foundation's locally driven approach that makes its programs effective, sustainable, and welcome throughout the Indo-Pacific region. The Foundation's work demonstrates how democracy can deliver. More people in Indonesia, Nepal, Laos, and Sri Lanka have access to justice to protect their lives and property and mediate disputes because of our judicial sector reform programs. More people are able to open their own businesses, title their land, and expand their livelihoods without having to pay exorbitant fees and corrupt practices in Mongolia, the Philippines, and Indonesia. More women have the ability to go to school, exercise their rights to vote and hold office, protect themselves and their children from traffic and violence because of the Foundation's efforts in Cambodia, India, Nepal, and Afghanistan. More people are finding opportunities through education and civic participation rather than extremist ideology and conflict in Thailand, Mindanao and the Philippines, and Malaysia. In conclusion, funding at $19 million will allow the Asia Foundation to invest in innovative programs that have received congressional encouragement. The Foundation's track record demonstrates that we can make effective and efficient use of funds to advance U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific region. We respectfully request that the committee support the Asia Foundation at $19 million for fiscal year 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we have so many good panelists left, but we're running way behind. So if you could possibly summarize, we'd be forever grateful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, Congressman Rogers, and the members of the subcommittee for inviting us here. On behalf of GPE, the Global Partnership for Education, I respectfully ask the subcommittee to recommend at least $125 million for fiscal year 2020 contribution to GPE. And further, I request that the subcommittee recommend at least $925 million in its contribution to basic education funding. Madam Chairwoman, Chairwoman Lomi, I would love to thank you so much for your leadership on global education, and in particular for your support for the fiscal year 2019 contribution of $90 million. This contribution will help GPE support more children in the world's 67 poorest countries get access to a quality education. Over the last several weeks, I've traveled to 3 West African countries. The first was Sierra Leone. There, years of civil war, the Ebola crisis have taken their toll on Sierra Leone's education system. But the country has a remarkable story of resilience and innovation. One example was the Ministry of Education's use of radio broadcasting during the Ebola crisis with the support of GPE to instruct students from a distance. 2 weeks ago, I was in Chad, where nearly 80% of the people are illiterate. And the government's biggest challenge is being able to deploy teachers out to the rural zones. There, I spoke with students at a teacher training college who told me that what they really need is books and teaching materials. Their library was virtually empty. So we will now work with Chad to address the lack of training and textbooks and other learning materials to enable teachers to get out to the rural zones. Last week, I was in Burkina Faso, where the growing threat of terrorism is keeping more than 150,000 children out of school. The situation there is particularly tough for girls. And at the Nelson Mandela School, I spoke with a group of courageous young women who told me about the everyday challenges that they face to get an education. 18-kilometer bicycle rides to school, hours of chores when they get home, and perhaps most troubling, sexual coercion to pay for school and, in fact, succeed in the classroom. GPE is working closely with the Burkinabe government to ensure that girls are educated, healthy, and safe. GPE is a public-private partnership. Our funding is results-based, and we support the strengthening and reform of national education systems. Overall, we reward progress on learning, on efficiency, and on equity. 28 of GPE's 67 partner countries are classified as fragile or conflict-affected. One such example is Yemen, where the escalation of armed conflict has yet led to considerable disruption in the provision of education. There, GPE has worked closely to restructure part of our work to refurbish 150 schools, provide support to 37,000 children, and basic school supplies for over 91,000 children. GPE-supported countries have shown remarkable results over the past 17 years of our existence. The primary school completion rate, one of our core measures, has climbed from 63% in 2002 to 76%. 74% of girls in GPE-supported countries now finish primary school, compared to 56% in 2002. While progress has been made, there remains a lot of work to be done in overcoming some of the gender disparities in many of the countries that we work in, and that is in part what we hope to use further funding to accomplish. Unless we increase investments in education, more than half of the upcoming young generation will not be on track to acquire basic secondary education skills. They will be shut out of the economic opportunities that many others have in other countries, and this can lead to instability and radicalization among youth. The United States, through USAID, sits on GPE's board and contributes very strongly, both strategically and technically, to our work. GPE's current strategic plan, in fact, is very well aligned with USAID's new global basic education strategy, and accordingly, U.S. support to GPE is contributing to the achievement of USAID's global basic education goals. GPE is also working closely with the business community in support of our overall education goals. Recently, we've launched a public-private data roundtable, which includes MasterCard, Microsoft, Intel, HP, Tableau, and others, who are providing their time free to us and their expertise to help improve data collection, management, and the utilization. Madam Chairwoman, I would urge the community to provide a fiscal year 2020 U.S. contribution to GPE of $125 million, and I would further urge you to support the overall level of basic education funding of $925 million. And I again thank you so much for the opportunity to work with you and for your leadership on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, members of the subcommittee, and staff. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of Jesuit Refugee Service USA on the importance of investing in refugee education as a critical component of the U.S. government's foreign assistance. Thank you. We urge the subcommittee to include at least $925 million in funding for basic education programs in the FY20 State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill, and to support at least $21 million in additional funding for Education Cannot Wait. Today, as you've heard, there are more than 68 million people worldwide who have been forced to flee their homes. Access to education for these forcibly displaced persons is critical. Not only does education offer essential protection and normalcy for children, it also gives them hope that they will have a better future that requires an education. Helping the millions of children who have been traumatized by violence and forced displacement build a brighter future is not only a moral obligation, but a wise global development strategy. How will these children someday lead a more peaceful world if we turn our backs on them today? Yet more than half of all school-age refugees, 4 million children, are out of school. Jesuit Refugee Service is an international Catholic organization with a mission to accompany, serve, and advocate on behalf of refugees and other forcibly displaced persons. Operating in more than 50 countries, JRS offers education both in refugee camps and in non-camp settings, including early childhood, primary, secondary, and tertiary programs. In addition, JRS offers vocational and teacher training, targets programs to women, girls, and people with disabilities, and supports new school construction and distribution of materials. We know from these experiences that for children in crisis situations, education is a necessity. Lack of education makes children vulnerable, including to recruitment by armed groups, child labor, and early marriage. And it leads to greater challenges in the future for the children themselves and their societies, and really for the entire global community. And the impact is felt most by girls, who are 2.5 to 3 times as likely to be out of school as boys in countries affected by conflict. The global response to this tremendous need has not kept pace. In 2016, education was only 2.7% of humanitarian aid. Robust funding of global education programs must become an essential part of humanitarian assistance. We applaud the Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs for supporting many life-changing educational programs. Of course, the U.S. cannot tackle this global challenge alone and needs to support multilateral efforts as well. Education Cannot Wait is the first global movement and fund dedicated to education in emergencies and protracted crises. It was established during the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016 to reposition education as a priority on the humanitarian agenda, promote a more collaborative approach among actors on the ground, and foster additional funding to ensure that every crisis-affected child and young person is in school. To date, ECW has raised over $336 million for both rapid response and multi-year funding platforms. This includes one $21 million contribution from the U.S. at ECW's launch in 2016. By 2021, ECW aims to reach 8.9 million children, half of whom will be girls. But it needs the support and leadership of the U.S. On behalf of JRS USA, I urge the subcommittee to support at least $925 million in funding for basic education programs and to support at least $21 million in additional funding for Education Cannot Wait. Thank you.
Thank you for this outstanding panel. I know we could continue the discussion, but we're going to have to vote shortly, so thank you. And our next panel, thank you. Our next panel is Mr. Nick Laragakis, President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Hellenic Institute, Ms. Anastasia Staton, Chair and Board Member of Halo Trust USA, and Mr. Van Krikorian, Co-Chair of the Armenian Assembly of America. I thank you for joining us today. We're going to have your whole testimony in the record, and if you would care to, we'd appreciate if you'd summarize your testimony. Thank you.
Chairman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing me to present today. My name is Anastasia Staton, and I'm here representing Halo Trust USA. As the world's largest humanitarian demining organization, Halo leads the effort to protect lives and restore livelihoods of those affected by conflict. We remove and destroy landmines, cluster bombs, and IEDs, and help secure weapons that could fall into terrorist groups' hands. For more than 20 years now, Halo has been a partner of the State Department's Conventional Weapons Destructions Program and its sole implementer of the USAID's demining program in Nagorno-Karabakh. I am honored to have the opportunity to draw your attention to these critical programs and implore you to increase support for the State Department's Conventional Weapons Destruction Program to a level of $219 million in FY20. This investment will fund demining and weapons destruction efforts in approximately 40 countries and territories, from Guatemala to Angola, from Kosovo to Laos. As you know, the Conventional Weapons Destruction Program has 3 primary goals, and for the sake of time, I will briefly review them. Enhance regional security by destroying weapons at the risk of diversion to violent non-state actors, to clear debris of war, thereby returning land to safe and productive use, and to promote U.S. foreign policy. But the most important benefit of these programs, and to be honest, what gets most of us out of bed each day, is saving lives. The latest Landmine Monitor report recorded 7,200 landmine and cluster bomb casualties in 2017. The vast majority of casualties were not soldiers, but civilians. And tragically, more than 2,400 of them were children. I'm often reminded of a family I met 2 years ago while observing the demining operations in Cambodia. A husband and wife approached me and told me that they had lost their son just 2 weeks prior. Their 17-year-old boy had been on a tractor earning a small extra dollars for his family. Unfortunately, that tractor ran over an anti-tank mine, and he was killed instantly. Landmines and other debris of war kill indiscriminately, and we must make every effort to eliminate those threats. Conventional weapons destruction activities also promote economic development that transforms people's lives. Within weeks of landmine clearance, refugees and families can return home, plant crops, and allow cattle to graze. Demining creates safe access to markets and enables the construction of schools, hospitals, and other vital infrastructure. Many State Department partners, like HALO, further empower communities by employing a local workforce. And in many countries, these are war widows, women, and other sole providers for their families. This means that the men and women of HALO are helping their own communities transition from the fields of battle into safe and thriving homes and workplaces. These programs also support security objectives through the destruction of insecure weapons, such as shoulder-launched missiles capable of downing civilian aircrafts. People aren't the only victims of mines. Wildlife suffers as well. The presence of mines in southeast Angola, near the headwaters of the Okavango Delta, have led to the deaths of elephants, hampered efforts to conduct biodiversity research, and interfered with anti-poaching activities. Since 1993, the U.S. has led global demining efforts, provided assistance to more than 100 countries, and helped over 17 of them reach mine-free status. For this reason, we asked the subcommittee to consider increasing support for this program to a level of $219 million. At the HALO Trust, we could not be more proud of our work and grateful for your funding and partnership. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Mr. Laragakis.
I will read fast. Good afternoon, Chairman Lowy and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the nationwide membership of the American Hellenic Institute, thank you for the invitation to testify on FY 2020 programs impacting United States interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. In keeping with the best interest of the United States, AHI opposes any assistance the administration will request for Turkey until Turkey withdraws all of its troops and illegal settlers from Cyprus and ceases and desists its acts of aggression in the Aegean, which are in violation of international law. We also oppose any reduction in the administration's proposed aid level of $5.7 million for the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus. AHI applauds the FY 2019 $1 million enacted funding level for NATO ally Greece's IMET program and supports a FY 2020 investment of $1.2 million. The U.S. has strategic interests in southeastern Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. Significant commerce and energy sources transit through the region. Greece, a dependable NATO ally, is an ideal strategic partner for the United States. With its centuries enduring presence, its close cultural, political, and economic ties to the broader region and to neighboring Western-oriented frontline countries that share democratic principles, such as Israel and Cyprus, Greece is strategically situated for the projection of U.S. interest by virtue of its geography and by being home to the most important U.S. military facility in the Mediterranean Sea, NSA Suda Bay, located on the island of Crete. Greece is an immensely valuable link, a pillar of stability in the region, as high-level U.S. government officials have noted. Greece is also a frontline state in the fight against terrorism. Greece is one of 5 NATO members to spend a minimum of 2% of GDP on defense expenditures, second only to the United States by percentage. Hence our FY 2020 programmatic request of $1.2 million request for IMET program. The IMET program advances the professional military education of the Greek armed forces and enhances interoperability with the United States and NATO forces. Our recommended funding request will be an effective investment toward a key component of U.S. security assistance in an increasingly critical region. Going on 45 years, Turkey illegally occupies the Republic of Cyprus, a member of the European Union and a nation with which the U.S. has a strategic partnership. AHI recommends appropriations language that any assistance provided to Cyprus by the subcommittee should be foremost to ensure that United Nations peacekeeping force in Cyprus can fully implement its mandate. Turkey is also a threat in energy security and U.S. interests and has exercised gunboat diplomacy. We welcome the U.S.'s continued support for Cyprus's right to develop its natural resources, especially as ExxonMobil announced last month the largest find thus far in Cypriot waters. Further, Turkey's $2.5 billion purchase of S-400 missiles from Russia concerns our NATO partners and is contrary to U.S. interests. Until resolved, AHI strongly recommends similar appropriations language regarding a report to the Congress on Turkey for the F-35. For all these reasons, including the suppression of religious freedom, for the ecumenical patriarchate, the world's oldest Christian church, we continue to oppose aid for Turkey, including most favored nation trade benefits. AHI welcomes the administration's intention to terminate preferential trade status under the Generalized System of Preferences program. Finally, the region's stability took a step forward with the ratified Prespas agreement between Greece and North Macedonia. However, we asked the subcommittee for continued oversight
of any assistance provided to North Macedonia to ensure it adheres to the agreement's principles. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lowy, members of the panel. And I will be brief. I'll only make 3 points because I appreciate we are pressed for time. And perhaps even counterintuitively, I'm going to start by paying my respects to the Halo Trust and Anastasia, rather than jumping directly into my own agenda. I think the work they do is critical. We support their request fully. I'm honored to be on the same panel. Last year, the Halo Trust lost 3 members doing demining activities near Armenia. 2 members were injured. And our hearts go out to all of them. We respect the work that they do. Our organization has raised funds privately to help in those efforts. And in that regard, I think this committee could do a world of good if it removed restrictions on U.S. aid to them, removing mines based on artificial Soviet borders. Our really deepest respect and sympathy. Second, I want to pick up on Congresswoman Frankel's excellent question to the 6th panel. Of course, the American Bar Association representative made a great point. IFAS made a great point about democracy backsliding and what do we do about corruption. It's a question that those of us who work in this area struggle with. It's what the U.S. wants to see. The idea is that the more democracy there's, the better, but then between that general concept and what actually happens, there's usually a big gap. How can the U.S. specifically help? First of all, reward people who have made progress toward democracy. And second of all, when it comes to corruption, I think the United States has to look at whether examples are made of corrupt individuals. In the United States, how did to go back, Elliot Ness and them do it? They targeted high-profile people who were corrupt, and they went after them. The United States still uses that philosophy successfully. The fact that we fund statutes or writing statutes and laws and things when judges themselves can be corrupt is completely counterproductive. In our experience, going after people, even if it's years later, to say you cannot get away with this, there will be consequences, the rule of law will apply, is the best approach. And I would expect that if countries were analyzed based on that, which it doesn't always have to be punitive, it can also be forms of a reconciliation type of process where people acknowledge what they've taken and give it back, I think might be a good metric for this committee and the United States to start using. Apropos of that, I think the United States looking itself, and I was glad to see, and we were glad to see that the Department of Justice is going to start more actively enforcing the Foreign Agent Registration Act. I would be remiss if I did not note the last organization scheduled to testify today has been clearly identified as one that benefits from corrupt funds from a foreign government and has not reported under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, nor has it reported under Congress's lobbying laws. The United States needs to look at its own rules. Finally, with respect to our specific request, yes, I think Congresswoman Frank picked up. Armenia had a remarkable year. Economist objectively named it the country of the year because of the democratic changes, a peaceful change in government, extremely clean elections, rule of law, you name it, across the board. And Time magazine named the current leader of Armenia crusader for democracy. The kudos, even, if you look at the State Department from the U.S. Trade Representative and others, I'm going to make it under the time, don't worry. Were remarkable, and that's why we're asking for something substantially more. We're asking for $100 million in economic and democracy aid to Armenia. We're asking for $10 million in FMF, and we're asking for another $20 million because Armenia has resettled refugees from Syria and the Middle East and given them safe haven, and we're expecting more, frankly. We don't know what's going to happen in the Middle East, frankly, and we're concerned about that. And finally, we're asking for $25 million to Nagorno-Karabakh for the benefit of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is one of the places where the Halo Trust works, but has also been a model of democracy in the region. How did I do?
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you for your understanding. Thank you and welcome. We'll begin with Mr. Rafi Karakashian and then Heather Ignatius and Ronate Asir-Watham. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to represent the Armenian National Committee of America to share our community's fiscal year 2020 foreign assistance priorities. As you know, we deeply value the U.S.-Armenia friendship and were particularly honored last year to be joined by Armenia's new president at an event the ANCA hosted on Capitol Hill, marking a century of U.S.-Armenia relations. Today, with the generous help of our Congress, Armenia is a strong friend of the United States, having sent troops to support our operations in Kosovo and Afghanistan, and working to address a range of regional challenges. Nagorno-Karabakh, with the support of direct U.S. assistance, stands today as a constructive partner in the search for a democratic and lasting peace in the Caucasus. It is in this spirit of friendship and shared democratic values that we come to you with our priorities for the coming fiscal year. First, an allocation of at least $6 million in assistance for Nagorno-Karabakh. We want to thank the subcommittee for its longstanding support for this program dating back to FY98. The Halo Trust, with the support of this subcommittee, is close to declaring Karabakh mine-free, but needs continued funds to complete its life-saving work. In addition to demining, we urge this panel to support the operations of Karabakh-based rehabilitation centers, which serve children, adults, and seniors with physical and mental disabilities. Besides meeting vital needs, U.S. aid to Karabakh also represents a confidence-building measure toward peace and a real investment in freedom. Second, an appropriation of at least $30 million in economic assistance and $10 million in military assistance for Armenia. In the aftermath of Armenia's constitutional political transition and recent free and fair elections, we want to share our special thanks with the subcommittee for its longstanding leadership in fostering the bilateral friendship of our two nations and to seek your continued support for strengthening Armenia's independence. Armenia, a Christian nation deeply rooted in Western democratic values, has emerged, despite dual Turkish and Azerbaijani blockades, as an important regional ally and international partner for the United States on a broad array of complex challenges. As we continue to work with the Trump administration to implement programs that promote U.S.-Armenia bilateral economic relations, such as a double tax treaty, we ask you to help Armenia make the transition from aid to trade by appropriating at least $30 million in economic assistance. Third, an appropriation of $20 million to help Armenia provide transition support to refugees from Syria who found safe haven in Armenia. Armenia has welcomed nearly 25,000 refugees from Syria with only modest levels of U.S. and international relief and resettlement assistance. Armenia has provided full citizenship rights to Armenian Syrian refugees and has sought to compassionately integrate all arriving families into Armenian society, but faces serious financial constraints in meeting the needs of these refugees. Special areas in need of support in terms of short-term housing, job training, and social and economic integration. Our prepared remarks also address the need to strengthen Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, the imperative of cutting U.S. military aid to an overarmed and belligerent Baku, and the benefits of lowering the barriers to U.S. contacts and communication with the people and government of Karabakh. In the fall of 2017, 3 members of Congress traveled to Karabakh to see firsthand the life-saving impact of the funds appropriated by Congress. We would welcome additional trips such as this and encourage members of this panel to consider visiting Karabakh. Thank you for your leadership on these important issues.
Thank you, and just noting that I've shortened my remarks to 2 minutes because I understand that time is an issue. Thought you'd appreciate that. Chairwoman Lowy, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of PATH.
a global team of innovators working to solve the world's most pressing health challenges so that people and communities can thrive. As an organization working in nearly 70 countries, including as an implementing partner of the U.S., PATH sees firsthand the tremendous impact of U.S.-supported global health programs. U.S. aid has saved the lives of millions and lifted communities out of poverty. Our sustained partnership over many decades means that a girl born in a rural village in Kenya is more likely to live to her 5th birthday. A person living with HIV in South Africa has access to life-saving ARV treatment. And a family in Vietnam can sleep under a bed net, reducing their chances of contracting malaria. Polling shows that Americans consistently support U.S. assistance for global health. These programs save lives and prevent needless suffering. They help our partner nations address fundamental challenges impeding their development. And they strengthen health systems abroad to prevent the spread of diseases, ultimately protecting the health of Americans. We respectfully request that this subcommittee allocate no less than $54.3 billion for state and foreign operations in FY20 in order to maintain programs that promote global health security, women and children's health, and global health research and innovation. We also support the allocation of $1.56 billion for the Global Fund and $290 million for Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, both which complement and reinforce the success of our bilateral programs. We appreciate your consideration and thank you for your support of these life-saving programs and for our work.
Thank you for all your good work. Nate, as you know.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, and thank you, Representative Frankel. I would also like to thank your fantastic staff for your commitment for public testimony. On behalf of the Global Campaign for Education US, I thank you for sustaining funding for global education in the fiscal year 2019. The funding is critical as education increases security and stability, spurs economic growth, and provides proven results across development sectors globally. The Global Campaign for Education US is a diverse coalition of more than 80 organizations working to ensure universal quality education for children around the world. I respectfully ask you to support effective investments in education globally for the financial year 2020 by allocating $800 million to USAID basic education bilateral programming, $125 million for the Global Partnership for Education, and at least $21 million for the Education Cannot Wait Fund. The power of education is clear. Brighter futures, healthier communities, and increased economic growth for individuals and countries. U.S. partnerships with developing countries have helped to build stronger education systems and drastically decreased the number of out-of-school children around the world. Education is a life-saving intervention for children during times of conflict. It provides a sense of normalcy in otherwise challenging circumstances, helps children heal from trauma, and offers an alternative to further migration in search of safety and security. Access to education, access to quality education, helps create a future for children where they can provide for themselves, their families, and help rebuild their communities. Fully funding our global education programs is not only the right thing to do, it is also a smart use of US resources. If all students in low-income countries left school with reading, numeracy, and citizenship skills, 171 million people could be lifted out of poverty. Education for girls is particularly effective. When 10% more adolescent girls attend school, a country's GDP increases by an average of 3%. By continued bipartisan congressional commitment to the issue of global education, Congress can ensure millions more children have the opportunity to reach their full potential. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate the shortening your remarks. Ms. Frankel, do you have any questions?
I'm listening. No, I won't. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
you. I welcome Mr. Kalatsky of the United Macedonian Diaspora. Oh,
Great.
and Madam Mamadova of the United States Azeris Network. Lois Pace, Global Health Council, and Mel Duncan, the Nonviolent Peace Force of the United States. Thank you. Please begin.
Thank you. Chairwoman Lowy, Representative Frankel. Yesterday was the 76th anniversary of the Holocaust of 98% of Macedonia's Jewish population, which occurred while Macedonia was occupied by Bulgaria. Bulgaria today does not apologize to the Macedonian Jewish community, and we urge you to use your congressional influence to change this. UMD serves as the voice of 500,000 Americans of Macedonian heritage and Macedonian communities abroad, and has been a champion for stronger U.S. relations with Macedonia. The U.S. has invested close to $2 billion of aid to Macedonia. Since 2008, when Macedonia's NATO membership was vetoed by Greece due to Greece's objections to Macedonia's name, Macedonian public opinion of the U.S. has been on decline. Macedonia's lack of NATO membership also saw a growing interest by Russia in the country. Russia historically has never been a friend to Macedonia, always supporting its neighbors to divide Macedonian lands and people. The decline has been largely due to the U.S., particularly under the latter part of the last administration, and especially under this administration, which applied significant pressure to Macedonia to change its name in order to join NATO while jeopardizing rule of law and democratic principles. The current administration also supported the illegitimate election of a former terrorist as Speaker of Macedonia's parliament, as well as allegations of members of Macedonia's parliament being paid to vote a certain way have yet to be investigated. For nearly 27 years, Greece has argued that Macedonia's name implied territorial aspirations on Greek lands. How U.S. and Greek authorities accepted North astonishes our community, since if there is a North, there must be a South. Media outlets have recently started to shed light about the gross violations against the Macedonian minority in Greece since 1913, and I invite you to read a BBC article published on February 24th called Greece's Invisible Minority, which can be found in the congressional record. Our organization has been a strong proponent of Macedonia's Euro-Atlantic future, however, only under the name Republic of Macedonia. UMD was strongly opposed to U.S. aid providing education funding on a September 30th referendum to change Macedonia's name. The referendum turnout was significantly under 50% needed by the Macedonian constitution, did not represent a mandate to change the country's constitutional name, or reflect the will of the Macedonian people. U.S. foreign relations and U.S. aid funding should address the most pressing unmet needs in Macedonia, such as media freedom, rule of law, economic problems, and environmental challenges in the country, and not be in the business of changing or influencing support for one political party over another or harming a country's right to self-determination. The sizable Macedonian diaspora worldwide, which provides close to 21% of Macedonia's annual GDP and remittances, can be a partner in these endeavors. Currently, publicly owned media outlets are strongly impacted by political parties. These media outlets are used to push certain political party agendas that may be at the jeopardy of the country's democratic growth. Work still remains to be done in the areas of increasing transparency and accountability of government, fighting corruption, improving the function of Macedonia's parliament, and a true decentralization of local governments. U.S. aid should help also small and medium-sized enterprises in Macedonia to team up with U.S. companies to expand trade. And another major area of funding needed is the helping Macedonia tackle its grave air pollution problem. Reports state that 2,000 Macedonians die each year due to air pollution. The U.S. can and should assist Macedonian authorities to implement collective measures to tackle this issue, as well as give civil society organizations the necessary resources to bring greater public awareness. Your subcommittee has the power to impact change for Macedonia. History will judge us if we continue to take away a people's right to self-determination. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Dear Mrs. Chairman Louis, Mr. Ranking Member Rogers, honorable members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today. Due to time constraints, I'll try to highlight the main points. The detailed report with facts, statements, and applicable laws can be read in our written statement. Sorry. To summarize the U.S. Azeris network request in the fiscal year 2020 aid to U.S. ally Azerbaijan, we are recommending $15 million or more in economic support funds, $1.2 million or more in international narcotics control and law enforcement, $1 million or more in international military education and training, and $1.7 million for foreign military financing. We are recommending not to provide any financial aid to Armenia or the illegitimate regime installed by the official Yerevan in the occupied Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. U.S. Azeris network promotes a fair and needs-driven foreign assistance based on the three important criteria: allied relationship of the recipient state with the U.S. and the U.S. national interest. The second, the recipient nation must have a demonstrated and certified necessity, need to be able to absorb the aid. Third, legality of the aid and compliance with the U.S. and international laws. Why zero out foreign aid and military financing support to Armenia? First, backed by Russia, Armenian army occupied Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan and 7 adjacent districts in 1992-1994. The UN Security Council passed 4 resolutions, 822, 853, 874, 884 in 1993, condemning Armenian aggression against Azerbaijan and demanding the withdrawal of all occupying forces. This was reiterated in the resolution 1416 of the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe adopted in 2005, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 62/243, adopted in March 2008, both reaffirming continued respect and support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and demanding unconditional withdrawal of all Armenian forces from all the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, and emphasizing no state shall render aid or assistance to the maintain the occupation of Azerbaijani territories. Second, since its independence, Armenia has chosen to be proxy of Russia. In March 2014, while Azerbaijan with the U.S. and other 100 states voted in the favor of UN General Assembly Resolution 68/262, reaffirming support for Ukrainian territorial integrity, Armenia joined a number of rogue states such as North Korea, Sudan, Zimbabwe to back Russia in its territorial annexation policies. Third, as a member of Collective Security Treaty Organization run by Kremlin, Armenia gets subsidized arms deals from Moscow on sophisticated weaponry which are directed against the U.S. allies, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and NATO member Turkey. In 2016, Armenia received $200 million loan from Moscow, which it spent on the purchase of hypersonic Iskander-M ballistic missiles that have a range up to 310 miles and can reach the energy infrastructure of Azerbaijan and strategic NATO facilities in Turkey. On October 12, 2017, Armenian and Russian officials announced yet another $100 million loan to Armenia for the purchase of modern weaponry in Russia. Armenia hosts a Russian military base with a lease extended to year 2044 and has a unified Russia-Armenian air defense. So obvious is Armenia's anti-Western position that its ex-president Serge Sarkisyan openly declared in 2015 that Armenia will coordinate its foreign policy with Russia, thus rendering its ties with Washington unimportant. Last month, despite Washington's criticism, the new Armenian leader, Nikol Pashinyan, dispatched nearly 100 military personnel to join the Russian military in Syria to aid the Assad regime and strengthen Moscow's political and military presence in the region. Finally, to summarize our position, I need to draw your attention to the U.S. federal law that prohibits U.S. aid to Armenia. Section 7069, the House Resolution 2029, Consolidated Appropriations Act 2016, passed by the U.S. Congress and signed by the President into the law December 2015, prohibits funds from being made available to a government of an independent state of the former Soviet Union if that government directs any action in violation of the territorial integrity or national sovereignty of any independent state of the former Soviet Union, such as those violations included in the Helsinki Final Act. Furthermore, Section 70 of the Act clearly states that none of the funds appropriated by this Act may be made available for assistance for the central government of a country that the Secretary of State determines and reports to the Committee on Appropriations has taken affirmative steps intending to support us, be supportive of the Russian Federation's annexation of Crimea. Armenia has violated the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, and Armenia has taken affirmative steps in supporting Russian Federation's annexation of Crimea. Therefore, based on the sections 70, 69, and 77 of the U.S. Consolidated Appropriations Act 2016, no financial assistance to Armenia should be made available for fiscal year of 2020, as it would literally constitute a violation of the U.S. federal laws. Moreover, as stipulated in the Department of State USAID Treasury International Program section of Trump administration's America First budget proposal, FY 2018, the 2018 budget must refocus economic and development assistance to countries of great strategic importance to the U.S., ensures the effectiveness of the U.S. taxpayer investments by right-sizing funding across the countries and sectors. Considering that the fact that Armenia is a Russian satellite with Russian troops deployed to its territory, and the Armenian commander-in-chief coordinates Armenia's foreign policy with Russia, and the Armenia is of no strategic importance to the United States, U.S. taxpayer money should not be allocated to this Russian proxy. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. My regards to the Chairwoman. Chairwoman Lowy, thank you very much for having us today, and also Congressman Frankel, thank you for your leadership, and my regard to the committee staff as well. So we once thought we could never beat smallpox or polio, and that the end of AIDS or malaria was beyond our reach. Now we know better, thanks to the promise and progress of global health. So I'm here today, Madam Chair, asking your committee to sustain federal funding for global health programs at USAID and state at a minimum of FY19 levels. And in doing so, we can uphold our legacy of U.S. foreign assistance and commitment to life-saving initiatives. But to be clear, we need more than what we have, especially since the budget has remained relatively flat for several years, and it's widened the gap between our needs on the ground and our funding required to address them. Our community, specifically our community of over 75 global health organizations, several of which have spoken today, estimate that the total should come closer to 11 billion and be even beyond that in order to keep pace with demand. However, we're grateful for the resources that we have received because they've made a tremendous impact and because global health works. So considering current events, you look at something like Ebola right now, continuing to plague the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and looking at that situation, noting that U.S. investments and innovation have helped change how local actors on the ground have responded to these and other outbreaks. That's allowed those local actors to keep pace with the epidemic and really keep it in check. However, global health is more than about a single emergency, as we know. And so we have these issues and partners that are interconnected in a way that makes progress in one area reliant on our success in another. So you look at longstanding investments like HIV, really leading to the creation of regional health and surveillance systems that are used by government officials, NGOs, the private sector, to mitigate other health crises like tuberculosis. We've also seen the value of pooling maternal and child health funding. So for example, a parent seeking reproductive health care can also take advantage of immunization and nutrition services, all as a seamless package. And the benefit of this complementary programming goes beyond health to other development sectors like education and infrastructure. So it's really important to me that we show this interrelatedness across these various issues, because we're all talking about specific issues, but really it comes together as an important ecosystem for people on the ground. And that's the main point I really want to make here today, is the fact that we need to meet people where they are as people and not the sum of their various conditions. This means doing what we can to get beyond strict line item thinking even. Ultimately, we should revamp the way we plan and fund U.S. global health initiatives so countries themselves can finally meet their goals and address the many other health and development priorities they'll face in the future. So in addition to sustaining U.S. commitments and leadership in global health, we feel that this committee has the opportunity to deliberately link overlapping objectives through more holistic funding streams, And it seems like a radical idea, considering how we've come to view our government's investments as major programs focused on singular issues and discrete results. And we're not saying we need to walk away from that, But as we find ourselves struggling to reach the last mile across several U.S. global health goals, we should be asking ourselves, what innovation could really put us across the finish line? And it might not be a magic bullet solution such as a new medicine or technology, but rather allowing ourselves to be that much more flexible in our funding and our partnerships. So we see the global health community moving in this direction, and government stakeholders and implementing organizations have been operating in a way that allows them to address these multiple focus areas through greater collaboration and efficiency. So some departure from a strictly rigid framework can pave the way even for sustainability and USAID's goals and self-reliance. This is really also, I'll end by saying, rooted in what we've been hearing from communities on the ground in countries themselves. They feel that they have a 360-degree view of factors that influence health in their population, and they often argue for coordinated investments. And so we're really hoping to find a way to better structure our programs in a way that builds on each other, and best serve the people on the ground with competing challenges that they define for themselves. It's not an either or, it's a both and, ideally. So I'll close by again thanking this committee for its ongoing commitment to global health and U.S. leadership in the world across these issues. We understand that the world is still looking to the U.S., given our longstanding history, to define the way forward on the next era of global health. And we feel that this committee has a critical role to play in how we respond, not with drastic cuts and disengagement, but substantial reinvestments and joint strategies that can foster cross-sector, whole-of-government cooperation. So just know that we stand ready to work with you on this 21st century agenda. Thank you again.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan.
Madam Chair Lowy and Congresswoman Frankel, thank you for the opportunity to testify this day. I am Mel Duncan. I represent Nonviolent Peace Force US. We are here today to urge you to include unarmed civilian protection as a recommended activity within the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs budget for 2020, including in the following programs: Women, Peace, and Security, Transition Initiatives, the Office of Reconciliation, and South Sudan. Unarmed civilian protection is a growing method for the direct protection of civilians by other civilians, using field-tested methodologies that have been shown to work in a variety of violent places in the world today. Unarmed civilian protectors live and work in the places where they serve and work with local civil society on the prevention of further violence. This approach has shown itself to be especially effective in protecting women and children. 42 governmental organizations working in 24 areas around the world are now practicing this method. An example of that, in South Sudan, where millions of people have had to flee, women living in what are called protection of civilian areas have to leave every day to get firewood. They are routinely raped by armed actors. What we have found is if those women are accompanied by unarmed civilian protectors, they are left alone. That method has been 100% successful over 2 years, over a 2-year period. In the island of Mindanao, in the Philippines, when there was a ceasefire called in 2009, we were invited to be part of that ceasefire. During that time, 2 armed groups were converging on a village. The people started to panic. They started to get ready to flee. The elders called one of our teams close by, who went to the village en route, called the 2 local commanders, and reminded them that would be a violation of the ceasefire. By the time the team got there, the armed groups had backed away and 600 people stayed home. In Sri Lanka, we would accompany mothers when they would retrieve their children who had been abducted by armed groups and forced to become child soldiers. We have appreciated the help of USAID in some of these projects, and we have found that this method is increasingly studied, and what has been found is lives are saved, communities are able to stay at home, peace and human rights work is possible, and the behavior of armed actors does change. So we would urge you to include the practice of unarmed civilian protection in the state foreign operations and related programs appropriations bill. Thank you.
Well, this was a grand finale. Yes.
This is the end.
Go ahead. You can ask a question.
All right. I really have two, but I'll
Go
ask.
ahead.
Okay. I want to ask Ms. Pace a question. Could you give me a specific example of what you're talking about in terms of, I guess, consolidating or coordinating services?
Yes, ma'am. And so I do prefer the term coordination. I think consolidation can make folks a little bit nervous. But I think the way we see it is, historically, and this is going back before the days of PEPFAR, we did attempt to have more of a systemic approach to health and development. But I think what we lacked at that time was this more results-based program that we've seen since the birth of PEPFAR, PMI, and other initiatives that are very, very well directed. And so I think what we would like to see now is a fusion of those two ideas, really because you look at something like the HIV epidemic. And I know that there are people who can speak better to this who work with the administration, but you see that we're falling behind in certain key populations, for example. And so if you look at how we can better address those issues, say among adolescents or among other special populations, there is an argument for having a more holistic approach so that we can...
Excuse me, this, not to interrupt, but...
Yes.
So you're talking about then you fund clinics or programs that do more than just one disease? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, ideally. Ideally, we can sort of break down the silos a bit. I see it like a house, and so we have been funding by initiative, and so you have one pillar or one beam looking at tuberculosis, looking at HIV, looking at other issues, but that house needs that very strong foundation, and often that comes down to a health system, so health workers, data and surveillance and other issues. And we've been, the programs and a lot of implementation organizations have been able to break that down to an extent and go into a community with a package of services, but there are some limitations to the way we allocate our funds that doesn't allow for as much integration or coordination. And so we're inviting the committee to really think about how that can be done, not just by partners like our stakeholders, international organizations, but also by the U.S. government. And that's done very well in humanitarian settings, for example, looking at things like WASH or infrastructure in those settings and really going in and saying, okay, what's the need and how we can coordinate across these various issues.
One more, Mr. Duncan, do we fund the unarmed protective security now?
It is funded somewhat on a piecemeal basis, both through USAID and OFTA.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I just want to say this was an excellent panel as well, and I look forward to continuing the discussion. Ms. Pace, what I have found in visiting in many parts of the world, I'd often bring all the people together from USA or from other countries who were working, and they didn't know each other. So I'm not sure it's a system that doesn't work, or it's the people who are in charge in that embassy that it doesn't work. But I have seen this over and over again. They all operate in their specific stovepipes, and they are not, frankly, coordinating as effectively as they could. So I think that's something we certainly could discuss further and get your advice about how we do it, because the individual people are doing great work, but if they coordinate and work together, they'd be more effective. So, thank you so very much. This concludes today's hearing. We made it through. We look forward to continuing to work with you, and this hearing stands adjourned. Thank you very much.